The lights of the television studio flickered, casting an eerie glow over the set as the audience murmured in anticipation. The host, Jerry Fallon, stood confidently at the center, his signature smirk in place as he prepared for yet another live taping of his popular talk show. But today was different. Today, the guest on stage wasn't just another celebrity, nor was he a political figure with a controversial opinion. No, today the world would meet Marcus, a 10-year-old genius who had the mind of an adult but the heart of a child. The moment the camera panned to him, Marcus flashed a nervous smile, his dark eyes wide with curiosity. He was small for his age, yet his presence on that stage was undeniable. His intelligence was sharp, but it was his quiet confidence that seemed to captivate everyone in the room. He didn't belong to the world of typical child stars, he was far beyond that. "Welcome, Marcus," Jerry greeted him, leaning forward with his trademark grin. "It's not every day we get a child prodigy on the show, so tell us, how does it feel to be so, ahead of your time?" Marcus shifted in his seat, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest as he thought carefully about the question. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but filled with the certainty of someone who had spent most of their life in a world adults typically dominated. "It feels strange," Marcus replied, his voice steady. "Sometimes, I wish I could just be a regular kid. But then I remember, regular kids don't get to change the world." Jerry laughed, the audience following suit. But there was an undercurrent of something darker in his laugh. He didn't fully believe Marcus. Sure, the kid was smart, but a genius? How could a 10-year-old boy possibly have anything important to say? Change the world? Jerry quipped, raising an eyebrow. "That's a mighty big statement for someone so young. What makes you think you're capable of something like that?" Marcus's gaze hardened, his eyes locking onto Jerry's with a quiet intensity. "Because, Jerry, if you don't think kids like me can change the world, then maybe it's time you started listening to them." The words hung in the air for a moment, thick with tension. The audience grew silent. This was not the response Jerry had expected. There was no hint of nervousness in Marcus's voice, only the certainty of someone who had already outgrown the world he was expected to fit into. Jerry shifted in his chair, his smirk faltering for just a second before he regained his composure. "All right, Marcus," he said, leaning back in his seat. "Let's see how much you really know. I've got a tough question for you. Let's see if your brain can handle this one." Marcus didn't flinch, his calm demeanor unwavering. "I'm ready." Jerry leaned forward, lowering his voice slightly. "Here's the question, if you could solve one problem in the world, just one, what would it be and why?" The audience waited with bated breath, but Marcus was already deep in thought. This wasn't just a typical trivia question. Jerry had intended to stump him, to catch him off guard. It was a challenge, a way to test just how deep this child's genius really went. Marcus didn't rush his answer, instead taking his time as he processed the question. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Marcus spoke, his voice steady and clear. "I would solve the problem of ignorance. Not the kind you see in school books or textbooks. I mean the kind of ignorance that makes people think they can't change the world, or that they can't dream big just because they were born in the wrong place, or look a certain way. The kind of ignorance that holds people back from believing in their own potential." Jerry blinked, surprised by the depth of Marcus's response. He had expected the typical answers, a cure for cancer, world peace, maybe an end to hunger. But this? This was different. This was a direct challenge to the very foundations of society. The silence in the studio was almost suffocating. The camera zoomed in on Jerry's face as he processed the answer. He had been expecting something grand, something flashy, something that would make the audience applaud. But what Marcus had said was not just profound, it was uncomfortable. It was a statement that made Jerry, and perhaps everyone in the room, question the assumptions they had been carrying for so long. A ripple of murmurs passed through the audience, but Jerry was quick to regain control. He chuckled again, but it was less confident this time. "Well, that's certainly one way to look at it," he said, his voice now tinged with a hint of defensiveness. "But I think we both know that solving ignorance is a pretty tall order for a 10-year-old. Marcus didn't flinch. "Maybe. But I don't think it's as impossible as you think." The tension in the air was palpable now. The studio was no longer just a place for entertainment. It had become a battleground of ideas. And Marcus, with his unshakable confidence, had just made it clear that he was ready to fight for his beliefs. The moment that followed was critical. The audience, who had initially been uncertain about Marcus, began to shift. Some faces were filled with admiration, while others seemed puzzled or uncomfortable. But all eyes were on the child who had just outsmarted a man twice his age. Okay, Jerry said, his tone now more conciliatory, but still laced with a hint of mockery. "Let's change gears a little bit. I think we need to lighten the mood, don't you think, folks?" But the damage had already been done. The words had been spoken, and they were not easily forgotten. Jerry Fallon might have been the seasoned host, but in that moment, it was Marcus who had stolen the show. The audience didn't know it yet, but what they had just witnessed was the beginning of something much larger than anyone could have anticipated. Marcus had ignited a spark that would soon grow into a fire of controversy, debate, and perhaps, change. Before they could fully process what had just happened, Jerry continued with his typical banter, but the energy in the room had shifted. No longer was it just a talk show. It was the stage for a revolution in thought, and one 10-year-old boy had just started the conversation. As the show wrapped up, Jerry gave his standard sign-off, but the words felt empty now. They were just words. The real message had been delivered by Marcus, and it was one that would echo in the minds of everyone who had watched. What happens when a child speaks the truth in a world that refuses to listen? Only time would tell. But for now, all anyone could do was wait for the next step in this story. The world had just been introduced to Marcus, the 10-year-old genius. And the shockwaves were only beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Marcus hadn't always been a public figure. He hadn't always known that he was different either. For most of his early life, Marcus had been like any other child, growing up in a small, modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood of Chicago. His mother, Olivia, was his world. A hard-working single mom, she struggled to make ends meet, balancing 2 jobs and raising Marcus on her own. There were days when she came home late, too exhausted to cook, and there were nights when she could barely keep her eyes open while helping Marcus with his schoolwork. But through it all, Olivia never stopped believing in her son. It wasn't until Marcus turned 5 that his mother started to notice something unusual about him. While most kids his age were still learning their ABCs, Marcus was already reading full sentences and solving simple math problems. By 6, he was devouring books on topics far beyond his years: physics, mathematics, even philosophy. Olivia didn't understand it at first. Her friends at work would tell her that Marcus was just a smart kid, but she knew it was something more. She just wasn't sure what. When Marcus was 7, Olivia decided to have him tested. The results shocked them both. Marcus had an IQ that placed him in the top 1% of the population. The numbers were staggering, but they didn't tell the whole story. It wasn't just that Marcus was a prodigy, he had a mind that seemed to absorb knowledge like a sponge, and an insatiable curiosity about how the world worked. But with that brilliance came an unexpected burden. As Marcus's intelligence grew, so did his isolation. He was ahead of his classmates in every subject. At first, this made him a bit of a local hero. Teachers praised him for his quick wit and ability to answer questions that even adults struggled with. But it didn't take long for the other kids to start noticing, and soon, the praise turned to envy. By 3rd grade, Marcus found himself in a world of loneliness, often sitting by himself at lunch, too absorbed in a book or a puzzle to pay attention to the taunts from his peers. His mother noticed the change in him, too. Marcus was quiet, withdrawn. He never asked for toys or games like other kids. Instead, he asked for books, books on subjects no one his age could even begin to comprehend. He asked for a telescope to look at the stars, a microscope to study the smallest things in nature. "Why do you always have to be so different, Marcus?" Olivia would ask him, half in frustration and half in awe. But Marcus never seemed to mind. He was different, and he knew it. It wasn't something he could change, nor something he really wanted to. It was just who he was. And somewhere in the quiet of his mind, he had always known that being different meant he had a job to do, something important that no one else could do, because they weren't like him. By the time Marcus was 9, Olivia had started to worry. The loneliness, the constant feeling of being out of place, it was starting to take a toll on her son. It was one thing to be a genius, but it was another thing entirely to be isolated from the rest of the world. She started looking for ways to help him fit in, to find friends who could understand him. But the truth was, there were few people who could keep up with Marcus's mind. No one at school could challenge him, and no one in the neighborhood shared his interests. One evening, as they sat at the dinner table, Marcus looked up at his mother with a strange intensity in his eyes. "Mom," he said quietly, "I think I'm ready." Olivia put down her fork, wiping her mouth with a napkin. "Ready for what, baby?" "I think I'm ready to do something big," Marcus said, his voice filled with a quiet confidence that Olivia hadn't heard before. "I'm going to change the world." Olivia looked at her son, a mix of pride and concern swelling in her chest. She had always believed in him, but now, for the first time, she wondered if maybe he wasn't just playing pretend. Maybe he really did believe that he could make a difference. "Marcus, you can do anything you put your mind to," she said, her voice full of emotion. "But don't forget to enjoy being a kid, too." Marcus didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked down at his plate, pushing his food around with his fork. "I don't think I'm meant to just enjoy being a kid," he said softly. "I think I'm meant to do something that changes everything." Olivia didn't fully understand what her son meant, but she did understand one thing: Marcus was no ordinary child. There was something about him, something that was far beyond the normal scope of childhood dreams. When Marcus turned 10, the opportunity to show the world his potential finally arrived. It came in the form of an invitation from one of the biggest talk shows in America, The Jerry Fallon Show. Jerry Fallon was a household name, the kind of host whose face graced the television screens of millions every night. His show was a mix of celebrity interviews, comedic sketches, and occasional moments of thought-provoking discussion. But it was never anything groundbreaking, until now. Marcus was both excited and nervous. He had never been on national television before, and he wasn't sure how the world would react to a child like him. But his mother, always his biggest supporter, encouraged him to go for it. After all, how many kids his age got an opportunity like this? "Just be yourself, Marcus," Olivia said as she helped him get dressed. "The world needs to hear what you have to say." And so, Marcus found himself sitting across from Jerry Fallon, under the bright lights, with a whole audience watching. He had no idea that this moment would be the start of a journey that would turn his life, and the lives of those around him, upside down. It was a journey that would force Marcus to confront not only his intelligence but also his place in a world that wasn't ready for him. It was a journey that would change everything. But for now, Marcus just sat there, quiet and calm, as Jerry Fallon prepared to ask him his first question. Little did anyone know, this would be the moment when everything shifted. The taping of the Jerry Fallon Show was only supposed to be a light-hearted, fun segment. It was meant to introduce Marcus as a child prodigy, show a few quirky interactions, and perhaps offer a little inspiration. But what Marcus had just said, about changing the world, about solving ignorance, had shifted the tone of the show in a way no one had anticipated. The next day, the footage from the show was everywhere. Clips of Marcus's interview went viral almost instantly, sparking debates all over social media. Was he really a genius? Was it possible that a 10-year-old had the power to change the world? What did he mean by solving ignorance? While some were in awe of Marcus's confidence, others were skeptical. Critics questioned how someone so young could grasp the complexities of world issues. Online forums were filled with harsh comments, some dismissing Marcus as just another overhyped child star, while others ridiculed his audacity to believe that someone his age could make a real difference. But the more they doubted him, the more his message seemed to resonate with people who felt like they'd been overlooked or dismissed. In Marcus's words, they found something they'd been missing: hope. The media, however, wasn't as kind. Jerry Fallon's producers, while initially enamored by the genius child concept, soon began to see the fallout from the interview. The show's ratings had spiked, yes, but now there was a backlash. Some felt that the show had exploited Marcus, turning his intelligence into a spectacle for the masses. Others felt that Jerry had been too dismissive, mocking the idea of a child challenging the status quo. Late that night, Jerry sat in his dressing room, flipping through the comments and watching the debate unfold on Twitter and Facebook. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications, some praising Marcus's audacity, while others criticized Jerry for not challenging him harder. But it wasn't the criticism from viewers that weighed on Jerry's mind, it was the message Marcus had delivered. "Change the world," Jerry muttered to himself, his fingers tapping anxiously on his desk. It was almost laughable. How could a 10-year-old truly believe that? And yet, Marcus had said it with such conviction. Jerry couldn't help but feel a pang of doubt. Had he underestimated the kid? Had he been too focused on being the wisecracking host and not focused enough on the potential behind Marcus's words? The next morning, Marcus's mother, Olivia, woke up to a flood of calls and messages. Many of her friends had seen the interview, some in disbelief at the way Jerry Fallon had treated her son. Olivia, who had spent most of her life keeping a low profile, was suddenly thrust into the limelight. She'd always supported Marcus, but she never imagined this kind of attention would come so fast or so intensely. She scrolled through her messages, some congratulating Marcus, others expressing concern. Olivia wasn't naive, she knew how this world worked. People were quick to judge, quick to label, and even quicker to tear someone down if they felt threatened. But she also knew Marcus, her son wasn't just a child with a high IQ. He had something deeper, something they couldn't understand. He had vision, and he wasn't afraid to show it. Yet the pressure was mounting. It was one thing to be a child genius, but it was something entirely different to be thrust into a storm of public scrutiny. Olivia worried about the toll this might take on Marcus, who had already struggled with feeling isolated from his peers. The attention might be too much for him to handle. "Maybe we should lay low for a while," Olivia suggested that evening as she and Marcus sat at the kitchen table. Marcus was scribbling notes on a notepad, his mind focused on something only he understood. He glanced up at her, his expression serious. "If we lay low, then we're letting them control the narrative, right?" Olivia paused. She hadn't thought about it that way. "But you've already said what you needed to say. The world heard you." "I know," Marcus replied, setting down his pen. "But they don't understand yet. They're not ready for it." His voice dropped, becoming quieter. "I'm not afraid of what they think, Mom. I'm afraid of what'll happen if no one listens." Marcus was right. The world wasn't ready for him, his ideas, his vision, his boldness. And yet, he had already set the wheels in motion. Over the next few weeks, the media frenzy surrounding Marcus only intensified. He was invited onto other talk shows, news channels, and podcasts. Everyone wanted to know what this brilliant young boy was thinking. What made him tick? What was his next big idea? But it wasn't just curiosity about his intelligence, it was the way he spoke with such certainty, such clarity, about issues that most adults struggled to even begin to understand. Yet as much as Marcus's words resonated with some, they alienated others. He became a target of public criticism. "You think you're going to solve ignorance, Marcus?" one critic wrote in an editorial piece. "You're just a kid. You don't even know what the world's really like. People like you are just trendy." Your 15 minutes are almost up. The word stung, but Marcus wasn't swayed. In school, things weren't any better. He had always been a quiet kid, but now he was a target for even more intense ridicule. His classmates, most of whom hadn't understood him before, now saw him as an outcast, a weirdo. They didn't see a young mind full of potential, they saw someone who made them feel small. His classmates began to whisper, to mock him when the teachers weren't looking. "You think you're so smart," one boy muttered as he walked past Marcus at his locker. "But you're still just a kid. No one cares what you have to say." Marcus said nothing in response, but inside, the words hurt. He had expected resistance, but the sting of betrayal from his peers was harder to bear. These were the people he had hoped to connect with, to understand him. Now, they seemed to despise him for his brilliance. Olivia saw the toll the media circus and school bullying were taking on her son. She knew it wasn't just about his intelligence anymore. It was about who he was and what he represented, someone who dared to speak out, to challenge the status quo. And people didn't like being challenged, especially not by a child. As the conflict around Marcus continued to build, Olivia found herself at a crossroads. She had always supported him, always encouraged him, but now she was worried. The pressure was starting to break him down. He was becoming withdrawn, quieter than before. The joy he once found in learning had turned into something darker, something almost like a burden. And so, she made a decision. She would pull Marcus out of the spotlight for a while, give him time to heal, to just be a kid again. But Marcus wasn't ready to stop. Not yet. He wasn't just a child prodigy. He had a message to share, and he wasn't going to let anyone, or anything, silence him now. A week had passed since Olivia's decision to pull Marcus out of the media spotlight. At first, it felt like the right choice. Marcus seemed to be a little less withdrawn, a little more like his old self. They spent more time together, Olivia reading to him, or they'd sit outside in the park, watching the world go by. He was still sharp, still thinking of things that no one else his age could even begin to comprehend, but for a brief moment, he seemed like just a boy again. But that didn't last long. One evening, as they were sitting in the living room, Marcus broke the silence. His voice was soft, almost hesitant, but there was no mistaking the urgency in his words. "Mom, I can't just hide away forever. I need to do this." Olivia put down her book, turning to face him. She had seen the determination in his eyes before, but it felt different now. It wasn't just about curiosity or the thrill of discovery. There was something else behind it, something deeper. "I know you want to change the world, Marcus," she said, her voice gentle but full of concern. "But you've already put yourself out there. You've spoken your truth. Is it worth all the hate, all the pressure?" Marcus met her gaze, his expression unwavering. "I can't let them stop me. I need to finish what I started. I have to show them that I'm serious. That I'm not just a kid talking nonsense." He was right, in a way. The world had seen his words, but it hadn't seen his actions. He knew that if he was truly going to make a difference, he couldn't just talk about changing the world. He had to show the world what he was capable of. And he couldn't do that by staying hidden away. He needed to take the next step, whatever the cost. After much discussion, Olivia reluctantly agreed. She realized that Marcus wasn't just a child. He was a force of nature, and she had no choice but to support him, no matter how scary the journey might seem. So, they returned to the spotlight. But this time, it wasn't just about appearances. This time, Marcus had a plan. The first step was a public lecture. Olivia helped him draft the speech, helping him organize his thoughts into something tangible, something that wasn't just an idea, but a movement. They contacted a local community center, and Marcus was scheduled to speak to an audience of thinkers, activists, and educators. It wasn't a huge crowd, but it was a start. When the day arrived, Olivia couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The lecture hall was filled with people who expected a show, another quirky kid with big ideas and a fast mouth. They didn't expect much more. And Olivia wasn't sure if Marcus was ready for the skepticism he would inevitably face. But Marcus, as usual, was unshaken. He stood at the podium, looking out at the audience with a calm that belied his age. The microphone was slightly too high for him, and his feet barely touched the ground, but he stood tall nonetheless. When he spoke, his voice was steady. His words were clear, confident, and surprisingly mature. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He dove straight into the heart of his message. People always say that the world is full of problems that can't be solved, Marcus began. But what if that's not true? What if the problems aren't too big for us to handle? What if the real problem is that we've been too afraid to even try? The audience was silent. Some were nodding, some were listening intently, but many were still skeptical. I know I'm just a kid. I know that many of you think I can't possibly understand the challenges we face. But I'm not here to talk about abstract ideas. I'm here to tell you that there's an answer, a way to change the world that doesn't require some grand revolution or impossible feat of strength. It requires knowledge, understanding, and most importantly, action. He paused, letting his words sink in. His eyes scanned the crowd, making sure each person felt the weight of his message. Think about it. If we really want to solve ignorance, if we really want to solve inequality, injustice, and suffering, we have to change the way we think. We can't just look at problems from the same old perspective and expect them to go away. We need new solutions. We need to stop pretending that the old ways of doing things are the only ways. We need to challenge everything. A murmur went through the room. Some people were beginning to feel the energy Marcus was putting out, but others were still unsure. It was hard for them to accept that this child, this kid who was barely 10 years old, was speaking to them like an adult. Like a leader. But Marcus wasn't done. Education is the key, he continued, his voice becoming more passionate. It's not just about textbooks and tests. It's about teaching people how to think for themselves, how to question, how to challenge, how to grow. We've been conditioned to accept what we're told. But we don't have to. We have the power to change the narrative. All of us. At this point, even the skeptics in the room were starting to lean in, to listen. There was something about Marcus's confidence, his unwavering belief in the possibilities of the world, that began to resonate. Marcus's speech didn't end with fireworks or loud applause. But it didn't need to. His message was clear. He wasn't just some novelty act. He wasn't just a boy spouting off clever lines. He was serious. He was ready. The moment he finished speaking, there was a stunned silence in the room. For a brief moment, no one moved. No one clapped. Then, slowly, one by one, people started standing, applauding. The applause grew louder and louder, until it became a standing ovation. Olivia, who had been sitting in the back, watching with a mixture of pride and anxiety, felt tears welling up in her eyes. Marcus had done it. He had proven to the world that he wasn't just a kid with big ideas. He was a force to be reckoned with. As the applause continued, Marcus stood at the podium, looking out at the audience with a quiet smile. He knew this was only the beginning. The world was listening now. But he also knew that the hardest part was still ahead of him. His words had sparked something, but now, he had to see it through. He had to turn his ideas into action. And that meant facing the toughest challenges yet, challenges that would test his resolve, his intelligence, and his ability to change the world. But Marcus was ready. He had already begun his journey, and there was no turning back now. The buzz from Marcus's lecture was undeniable. News outlets, local blogs, and even national networks picked up on his words, sharing clips and discussing the child genius, who dared to believe he could change the world. His social media accounts exploded with followers, comments, and support. The hashtag #ChangeWithMarcus started trending, and for the first time since the media frenzy began, it felt like people were genuinely interested in his message, not just his age. For Marcus, however, the applause and attention were short-lived. The media's adulation was quickly followed by skepticism, some bordering on hostility. As his platform grew, so did the critics. A few days after the lecture, Marcus was scheduled for another talk on a major news network, one with a much larger audience. But this time, there was a twist. The host, Claire Richards, a renowned journalist known for her tough interviews, was determined to make Marcus prove his claims. Claire, a seasoned professional who had interviewed world leaders and celebrities, wasn't interested in entertainment. She wanted results. The day of the interview arrived, and Marcus's nerves were palpable. Olivia, who had been by his side through the entire whirlwind, could sense the unease in her son. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder as they sat backstage, waiting for their cue. "You've already shown them who you are, Marcus," she said softly, trying to comfort him. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone." But Marcus wasn't so sure. He knew that this interview could either solidify his position as a force for change or sink him deeper into the public eye as just another kid with a dream. As the cameras began rolling, Claire gave Marcus a sharp, focused look. "So, Marcus, last time you spoke about solving ignorance and challenging systems that have been in place for centuries. But you're a 10-year-old boy, and many would say you don't have the experience to understand how deeply rooted these issues are. What do you say to that?" The question, though calculated, was direct. It caught Marcus off guard, and for the first time, doubt flickered across his face. He took a deep breath, his mind racing. This was the moment that could either make or break him. He met Claire's gaze and let out a steady breath, trying to steady his nerves. "Age isn't the barrier to understanding," Marcus replied, his voice calm but firm. "Experience is valuable, yes. But ignorance doesn't require experience. It only requires that we stop asking the right questions." Claire's eyebrows raised, but she pressed on. "That's a lofty claim for someone so young. You're talking about the education system, the economy, world politics. These are things adults struggle to comprehend. Do you really believe a child can make a real impact on those?" Marcus didn't falter. He had spent weeks rehearsing his ideas, his message. Adults aren't the only ones who can see what's wrong. Sometimes, we get so used to the way things are that we stop questioning them. Children haven't been conditioned by those systems yet. We see things differently. Claire leaned forward. "But don't you think the challenges you're proposing are naive? You can't change the world by just thinking differently. You need resources, support, and most importantly, real power. How do you intend to tackle that?" Marcus's heart raced, but he forced himself to remain composed. He wasn't about to back down now. "I don't need power. I need people," he said. "And that's what the world needs right now. People who believe in change. People who are willing to push the boundaries of what's possible." The silence in the room was deafening. Claire stared at him, momentarily taken aback. The audience waited for her to respond, but the sharp edge of her next question never came. Instead, there was a shift in the room, as if the energy had subtly changed. "I'm not going to pretend I have all the answers," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. "But what I do know is that we can't afford to stay quiet. People like me, young people, are the future. We may not have the experience of adults, but we have the imagination, the drive, and the will to push for a better tomorrow." The room was still. Marcus looked down at his hands, his heart pounding in his chest. The energy was palpable, and for a split second, it felt like the entire world was holding its breath. Then, slowly, Claire sat back. She didn't offer a sharp retort or a dismissive comment. She simply nodded, and for the first time, there was a hint of respect in her eyes. "Well, Marcus," she said quietly, "you may be right. Maybe the world has more to learn from young people than we realize." The cameras stopped rolling, but the silence lingered for a long time. Olivia watched from behind the scenes, tears welling in her eyes. She had seen the strain in Marcus over the past few days. She knew how much this moment had meant to him. And then it hit her. For the first time, the world wasn't mocking him. The world was listening. The next morning, the news was everywhere. Headlines like, "10-year-old genius dares to challenge the system," and "Marcus Jackson, the voice of a new generation," filled the pages. Social media exploded with support, but also with more criticism. Some embraced his message, some ridiculed him further. But what mattered was that people were talking. Marcus had done the one thing he set out to do, he had sparked the conversation. But amidst the praise, something darker was beginning to emerge. As the conversation grew louder, so did the voices of those who felt threatened by Marcus's boldness. The media, which had once celebrated him, began to shift. Commentators who had initially been intrigued by his message now seemed intent on proving him wrong. And the most vocal among them was Jerry Fallon, the very man who had launched Marcus into the limelight in the first place. Jerry had been watching Marcus's rise with growing concern. In his mind, Marcus was a tool, a brilliant one, but a tool nonetheless. He had used the boy for ratings, for the buzz, for the entertainment value. But now, Marcus was becoming something bigger. He wasn't just a novelty act. He was a challenge. And Jerry didn't like it. Jerry's latest show was set to air in a few days, and it was clear, he had every intention of dismantling Marcus's message, piece by piece. What Jerry didn't realize, however, was that Marcus was no longer the naive boy who had stumbled into the spotlight. He had grown. He had found his voice, and he wasn't going to let anyone silence him. As the emotional climax of his journey approached, Marcus knew that the real battle was just beginning. And this time, he wasn't backing down. The week after the interview with Claire Richards, Marcus found himself facing the consequences of his boldness. The media had exploded, with people either rallying behind him or fiercely opposing his ideas. For every tweet of encouragement, there was a scathing critique. For every article praising his intelligence and vision, there was one that mocked his age and inexperience. But through it all, Marcus stayed focused on his mission, to be the change he wanted to see in the world. Despite the overwhelming support, he knew that the real test was coming. Jerry Fallon, the man who had helped launch him into the media spotlight, was preparing for a live broadcast that was set to air in just a few days. Jerry's talk show was one of the most watched programs in the country, and it seemed like the perfect platform for Marcus to further solidify his message, or be torn down completely. Olivia had tried to prepare Marcus for the battle that lay ahead. She knew that Jerry would go all out to challenge her son's ideas, not out of malice, but because he felt threatened by Marcus's growing influence. Olivia had been by Marcus's side from the very beginning, but this was different. This wasn't just about a lecture or a local talk show. This was the big leagues. If Marcus could survive Jerry Fallon's tough questions, he would prove to the world that he was more than just a child prodigy, he was a force to be reckoned with. The night before the show, Marcus sat in his room, staring at his reflection in the mirror. He wasn't scared, he had faced so many challenges already. But this was the moment that would define everything. What if they don't listen, he muttered, not to anyone in particular, but to himself. What if they just keep calling me a kid? Olivia entered the room, sitting next to him on the bed. She could see the doubt in his eyes. She had always known her son to be confident, but even the bravest of warriors faced moments of uncertainty. "Marcus, listen to me," she said softly, her voice steady with conviction. "You've already done something most adults could never do. You've sparked a conversation that has the power to change lives. But the world isn't going to make it easy for you. They'll question you. They'll doubt you. But that doesn't change who you are, or what you stand for." Marcus looked at her, and for a moment, his uncertainty seemed to melt away. Olivia's words had always been his anchor. She was right. The world might challenge him, but he had already found his purpose. I'm not going to let them stop me, Marcus said, his voice firm. Tomorrow, I show them that I'm serious. The next day, Olivia and Marcus arrived at the studio for Jerry Fallon's show. The tension in the air was palpable. There were people milling about, cameras being adjusted, and producers rushing around behind the scenes. But Marcus walked into that room like it was any other day. He wasn't going to let the chaos shake him. The moment Jerry Fallon stepped onto the stage, the atmosphere changed. He was a charismatic man, known for his quick wit and sharp tongue. He had built his career on asking tough questions and getting to the heart of the matter, but this time, he wasn't facing a seasoned politician or business mogul. He was facing a child, a prodigy, yes, but still a child. And that fact alone seemed to irk Jerry. Marcus, welcome to the show, Jerry said with a forced smile. I have to admit, I wasn't sure we'd ever get you here. But now that you are, let's get down to it. You've made some pretty bold claims about changing the world, about solving problems that even the smartest adults can't figure out. I want to know, where exactly do you think a 10-year-old like yourself fits into all of this? The question was a jab, designed to undermine Marcus's confidence. The audience watched with bated breath, and for a moment, the weight of Jerry's words hung in the air. But Marcus wasn't fazed. He had anticipated this moment, and he knew exactly how to respond. I'm not here because I think I have all the answers, he said, his voice calm but unwavering. I'm here because the world needs answers, and I believe we can find them if we stop relying on the same old systems and start thinking differently. Jerry smirked. Oh, so you want to throw out everything that's been done before and start from scratch? What makes you think that's even possible? You're talking about solving problems like inequality, corruption, climate change, all these massive issues that have been around for centuries. You really think you can do that just by changing the way people think? Marcus leaned forward, his eyes sharp with intensity. It's not just about thinking differently. It's about acting differently. We've been told for so long that certain things are just the way they are, that we can't change them. But that's not true. We don't have to accept the world as it is. We can create a new world, one where people work together, where we fight for fairness, and where we stop pretending that the way things have always been is the only way they can be. Jerry raised an eyebrow. He was clearly taken aback, but he wasn't going to give up that easily. All right, Marcus, he said with a laugh. Let's say you're right. Let's say you can change the world. But how? How does a 10-year-old kid like you actually make that kind of change? You don't have the resources. You don't have the power. What do you plan to do? Just talk people into it? Marcus paused for a moment, collecting his thoughts. This was the hardest part, convincing people that change wasn't just some idealistic dream. But he had the words. He had the vision. And he wasn't going to let Jerry or anyone else stop him. I'm not trying to talk people into it, Jerry, Marcus replied, his voice steady. I'm asking people to act. Change doesn't start with power or resources. It starts with people who are willing to stand up and say, enough is enough. It starts with all of us, coming together, doing what we can, where we are. It's not about waiting for someone to give us permission to make the world better. It's about taking responsibility and doing the work ourselves. There was a brief silence. For a moment, Jerry didn't know how to respond. His smile had faded, replaced by a look of genuine contemplation. Marcus's words had struck a chord, not just with the audience, but with him as well. But Jerry quickly recovered, throwing one last shot. Well, Marcus, I have to say, you've got guts. But you're still just a kid. I'm not sure the world is ready for someone like you. Marcus stood tall, his resolve unwavering. Maybe the world isn't ready for someone like me. But it's going to have to get ready, because I'm not going anywhere. The studio audience erupted into applause. The weight of Marcus's words hung in the air like a challenge. He wasn't just speaking for himself anymore, he was speaking for a generation that was tired of being overlooked, of being told that they didn't matter. As the applause died down, Jerry leaned back in his chair, clearly impressed despite himself. Well, Marcus, I think we've got a lot to think about. You've certainly given us a lot to chew on. Marcus smiled, the tension finally starting to ease. He had done it. He had stood his ground, not just against Jerry, but against the world. And he had won. As the cameras stopped rolling, Olivia rushed to his side, her heart swelling with pride. You did it, Marcus. You were amazing. Marcus looked up at her with a quiet smile. This is just the beginning, Mom. We've got a lot of work to do. The journey was far from over. But with every step, Marcus was proving that no dream was too big, no challenge too impossible. And the world was starting to listen. The day after Marcus's fiery exchange with Jerry Fallon, the world woke up with a different perspective on the young genius. The news broadcasted his powerful words, and social media was alive with heated discussions. People who had initially laughed at Marcus, who had dismissed him as just another kid with big ideas, were now reconsidering everything they had believed. His message, delivered with such maturity and passion, resonated on a level that no one had expected. The next morning, Olivia sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open, scanning through the flood of emails and messages that had come in overnight. There were heartfelt notes of encouragement from parents and teachers, along with a handful of invitations for Marcus to speak at various events. Some were from universities, others from activist groups, and a few from companies interested in collaborating with him on projects. Olivia was amazed at how quickly everything was changing. Just a few months ago, Marcus was a kid who spent most of his time reading books and solving complex problems in his bedroom. Now, he was a global figure, someone whose words had the power to shake even the most stubborn institutions. But amidst the praise, there were still voices of dissent. Critics began to question whether Marcus was simply being used as a pawn by adults who wanted to take advantage of his youth and idealism. They accused him of being manipulated by his parents and advisors, suggesting that a 10-year-old couldn't possibly have the depth of understanding needed to address global issues. I just don't get it, Olivia muttered under her breath as she scrolled through a particularly harsh editorial. Why can't they see what he's trying to do? Marcus walked into the kitchen, holding his favorite book in one hand, the pages slightly worn from being read countless times. He had spent the morning reading and reflecting on the storm of attention his speech had caused. Despite the praise, despite the pressure, he wasn't feeling the same excitement he had in the beginning. Instead, he felt a strange mix of anxiety and determination. Mom? Marcus asked, looking at her with his big brown eyes. Do you think people are just saying nice things because I'm a kid? Olivia blinked, taken aback by the question. She had expected her son to feel validated by the response, but she hadn't considered that the attention could weigh on him like this. No, Marcus, she said gently, pulling him into a hug. People are listening because you've made them think. Because your words matter. What you're saying isn't just the opinion of a child. It's the voice of a generation that's tired of waiting for change. Marcus rested his head on her shoulder, the weight of it all becoming clear to him. But what if I'm wrong, Mom? What if I'm just dreaming too big? Olivia kissed the top of his head. Your dreams are never too big. The world may try to tell you that, but don't let them. You have something to offer that nobody else can. Your heart. Your vision. And that's what matters. The conversation was a much-needed reminder to Marcus of why he had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't for fame, it wasn't for recognition, it was because he truly believed that he could make a difference. And he knew that, no matter how much resistance he faced, he couldn't back down now. Later that day, Marcus received a call that would alter the course of his path. It was from an influential tech entrepreneur named Jessica Harper, who had seen his interview with Jerry Fallon and was eager to meet him in person. She had been watching the growing movement around Marcus and saw the potential for real change. Marcus, Jessica said over the phone, I've been following everything you've been saying. And I think what you're doing is more than just inspiring, it's revolutionary. I want to help you bring your ideas to life. The offer was more than just a chance to collaborate on a project, it was an opportunity to put his words into action on a massive scale. Jessica offered to fund a non-profit organization that would help bring innovative solutions to the issues Marcus had been talking about: inequality, climate change, education reform. It was a dream come true, but it also came with enormous responsibility. "You've got the vision, Marcus," Jessica continued. "I've got the resources. Together, we can change the world. But it's going to take a lot of hard work. Are you ready for that?" Marcus hesitated for only a moment. His mind raced with the possibilities. A non-profit organization. The chance to make a tangible difference. This could be the turning point he had been waiting for. "I'm ready," Marcus said, his voice filled with conviction. "Let's do it." As he ended the call, a wave of excitement washed over him. For the first time, he felt like the world wasn't just listening to him, they were ready to act. And with Jessica Harper's resources and connections, the possibilities were endless. But as the excitement of this new partnership began to settle in, Marcus also realized that this was only the beginning. The more he learned about the challenges ahead, the more he realized that change wasn't going to come easily. It wasn't going to be a quick fix. The road ahead would be filled with obstacles, both external and internal. He had to stay true to his vision, even when the world doubted him. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Marcus worked tirelessly with Jessica Harper and her team, meeting with experts in various fields to develop concrete plans for the nonprofit. They held brainstorming sessions with activists, educators, and business leaders, all of whom were eager to help Marcus bring his ideas to life. The momentum was building, and it seemed like nothing could stop them. But the media, ever hungry for controversy, started to dig deeper. They began to focus less on the impact Marcus was making and more on his age. Articles began to surface that questioned whether it was ethical for an organization with such significant power to be run by a child. The criticisms were harsh, but they were nothing new to Marcus. He had faced doubts from the beginning. Still, this time, the scrutiny felt more intense. People who had once supported him now began to question whether he was too young to lead such a large initiative. "I just don't get it," Marcus said to Olivia one night, the weight of the criticisms pressing on him again. "They don't think I'm old enough to make a difference. They don't believe I can do it." Olivia, always his rock, took his hand in hers. "Marcus, you can't change everyone's mind. But you don't need to. You've already proven you're capable of making a difference. Now it's time to show them that age doesn't determine impact, heart does." Marcus nodded, feeling a renewed sense of resolve. He knew what he had to do. It wasn't about silencing the critics, it was about moving forward despite them. And with each step, he would prove that change wasn't about age, but about the willingness to challenge the status quo. The world was watching. And Marcus was ready to show them that he wasn't just a boy with big ideas, he was a boy with the power to change everything. As the weeks passed, Marcus's influence continued to grow, but with it came a new kind of pressure. His every move, every word, was being scrutinized by the media, both in the United States and across the world. The project with Jessica Harper was moving forward, but as it gained momentum, so did the resistance. There were whispers in corporate boardrooms, heated debates on television networks, and opinion pieces questioning whether a child, no matter how gifted, should be at the helm of such a powerful initiative. In spite of the negativity, Marcus felt more determined than ever. He spent hours with Jessica and her team, refining their vision and planning their next moves. His days were filled with meetings, presentations, and late-night brainstorming sessions. He was learning more about the world of nonprofits, about fundraising, and about how to turn his vision into something concrete. But it wasn't just about ideas anymore. It was about delivering results. It was about making a real difference, not just in words, but in action. One evening, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, looking over a presentation for a press conference they were preparing for the next day. It was going to be a pivotal moment, the first official unveiling of the nonprofit's plans to the world. This was the moment when they would announce their commitment to addressing some of the world's most pressing issues: climate change, inequality, and education reform. As he read over the speech he was supposed to deliver, he felt a familiar knot in his stomach. The weight of the responsibility was starting to feel overwhelming. What if he wasn't enough? What if he couldn't meet the expectations that had been set for him? "Mom," Marcus said, breaking the silence. "What if I mess up tomorrow? What if people don't believe in me anymore?" Olivia walked over to him, sitting down beside him and taking a deep breath. "Marcus, listen to me," she said softly. "You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be real. You're doing this because you believe in it. People will see that. They will believe in you because you believe in yourself. And that's what matters." Marcus met her gaze, and for the first time in days, he felt a little bit of the weight lift from his shoulders. His mom had always known how to calm him when the world felt too big. She was right. It wasn't about the pressure of living up to everyone else's expectations, it was about staying true to his own. The next day, as Marcus prepared to step onto the stage at the press conference, his heart pounded with anticipation. The room was filled with reporters, photographers, and influencers, all eager to see the young boy who had taken the world by storm. The cameras were flashing, the lights were blinding, and the noise was deafening. But Marcus remained calm. He had been preparing for this moment for months. When it was time for him to speak, he stepped up to the podium, facing the sea of people in front of him. For a moment, he let the silence hang in the air, allowing the tension to build. The crowd was waiting, hanging on his every word. "I'm here today because I believe we can do better," Marcus began, his voice steady. "We've been told for years that the world can't change. We've been told that certain problems are too big, too complicated, or too entrenched in the systems we've built. But I believe we can fix them. I believe that each of us, no matter how old, no matter where we come from, has the power to make a difference." His words were simple, but they had an undeniable power. He wasn't just speaking for himself, he was speaking for everyone who had been ignored, dismissed, or told that they were too small to make a difference. And as the press conference continued, something incredible began to happen. People weren't just listening, they were responding. The journalists, who had come to scrutinize him, were now asking questions not to challenge him, but to understand him. They were curious about the vision he had for the future, about how they could be part of the change he was advocating for. The atmosphere in the room shifted from skepticism to hope, from doubt to possibility. Jessica Harper, who had been watching from the sidelines, stood with a proud smile. She had seen potential in Marcus from the very beginning, but now, seeing him speak with such clarity and passion, she knew that he was capable of leading this movement to something greater than anyone had imagined. The press conference was a success, and within hours, the news was all over social media. Hashtags like #MarcusTheVisionary and #ChangeIsPossible began trending worldwide. Celebrities, activists, and everyday people started sharing his message, pledging to support the nonprofit in any way they could. There was a renewed sense of energy in the air, a feeling that something big was beginning to shift. But as the praise poured in, so did the criticism. Some called him a puppet for the wealthy elites, accusing Jessica Harper and her team of using Marcus to push their own agendas. Others questioned whether a child could truly understand the complexities of global issues, suggesting that he was being exploited. Despite the negative comments, Marcus felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. He had done what he set out to do, he had made the world listen. And as the days went by, he found himself receiving messages from people all over the world, people who had never thought about the issues he was tackling, people who felt inspired to take action for the first time. But as much as he wanted to enjoy the victory, Marcus knew that this was only the beginning. The real work was still ahead of him. There were still countless problems to solve, and he couldn't do it alone. He needed help. He needed people who believed in the same vision, people who were willing to take action. He spent the next few weeks connecting with grassroots organizations, educators, environmentalists, and activists who were already working tirelessly to address the issues he cared about. His nonprofit began to take shape, and the groundwork for the first major project was laid. One afternoon, as he sat in the conference room with Jessica and a team of advisors, he looked around at the faces of the people who had joined him on this journey. He realized that this wasn't just about him anymore. This was a movement. A collective force that was ready to reshape the world. "This is just the start," Marcus said, his voice filled with determination. "We've got a long way to go, but we can't stop now. The world is watching, and we're ready to show them that change is possible." And with that, Marcus took the first step into the future he had always dreamed of. He wasn't just a boy with ideas, he was a leader, someone who had already started to change the world. The road ahead would be filled with obstacles, but Marcus was ready for whatever came next. The weeks that followed Marcus's press conference were filled with rapid growth. His nonprofit organization, fueled by Jessica Harper's resources and a growing team of passionate advocates, began to take shape in ways that no one had expected. Plans for the first few major initiatives were rolled out: educational programs, climate reform projects, and community-driven social justice campaigns. The world was watching, waiting to see if this young visionary could deliver on his promises. But as the spotlight grew brighter, so did the shadows. Marcus's newfound fame began to pull him in directions he hadn't anticipated. Though the world had rallied behind his message, the weight of responsibility began to press down on him harder than ever before. It wasn't just the pressure of living up to expectations, it was the constant, ever-present voices of doubt. The media continued to question his ability to lead, to understand the complexities of the issues he was tackling. Critics began to dig deeper into his personal life, trying to find cracks in his story, to find out if he was truly the genius everyone thought he was, or if he was simply a puppet for those pulling the strings behind the scenes. One evening, after a long day of meetings and presentations, Marcus sat alone in his room, flipping through pages of a new book on social change. His mind was overwhelmed with the enormity of the task before him. He had always believed that he could make a difference, but now that the world was paying attention, the reality of it all was starting to feel like a heavy burden. "Marcus?" Olivia's voice broke through his thoughts as she knocked gently on his door. "Can we talk for a minute?" Marcus looked up, blinking. He hadn't realized how lost he'd become in his own mind. "Yeah, Mom. Of course." She walked in and sat next to him on the bed. She could see the fatigue in his eyes, the uncertainty that had crept in since the press conference. She had watched him grow, watched him face challenges that no child should ever have to face, but now she could see that the pressure was beginning to take its toll. "You've been quiet lately," Olivia said, her tone soft but concerned. "Is everything okay?" Marcus hesitated, then sighed. "I don't know, Mom. People are saying stuff. They're questioning me. I'm starting to wonder if I can really do this. What if I'm not cut out for all of this?" Olivia's heart sank at his words. She knew how much he cared about the work they were doing, how deeply he felt the weight of the world's problems. But she also knew how dangerous doubt could be, how quickly it could chip away at even the strongest resolve. "Marcus," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion, "you've already done something incredible. You've made people believe that change is possible. That's not something that happens overnight. People will doubt you. They will question you. But that doesn't change the fact that you're doing something that matters. You're giving people hope." Marcus looked at her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "But what if that's not enough? What if I can't fix everything?" Olivia smiled softly, taking his hand in hers. "You don't have to fix everything. No one expects you to. All you have to do is keep doing what you're doing, believe in your vision, trust in the people around you, and never stop trying. The world is full of problems, but it's also full of people who want to help. You don't have to do it alone." The sincerity in her voice settled over Marcus like a warm blanket. He knew his mom was right. He couldn't do it all, but he didn't have to. He had built a team of passionate, dedicated individuals who shared his vision. Together, they could make a difference. It wasn't about perfection, it was about progress. Just as Marcus was beginning to find some peace with his doubts, a new challenge appeared, one that would test him in ways he hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, Jessica Harper called him into a meeting. She had been in contact with a high-profile philanthropist named Henry Caldwell, a billionaire whose foundation had a history of funding large-scale social change projects. They had been discussing potential partnerships for Marcus's nonprofit, and it seemed like this could be the break they needed to take their mission to the next level. But when Marcus walked into the meeting room, he was greeted not with the warm smiles he had expected, but with cool professionalism. Henry Caldwell was a well-known figure in the world of philanthropy, but he was also known for his ruthless approach to business. He didn't have time for idealism, he had one goal: results. And his meeting with Marcus would test whether the young boy's vision was truly worth the investment. "Marcus," Henry said, his voice sharp and businesslike. "I've been following your progress. And while your passion is commendable, I have to ask, what exactly makes you think you can lead a global movement at your age? The world isn't going to change just because you say the right things." The words stung more than Marcus expected. He had spent so much time focusing on the people who believed in him that he hadn't prepared for the people who didn't. Henry's cold demeanor made it clear that he wasn't here to offer support, he was here to size Marcus up, to test his worth. "I don't think I can change the world by myself," Marcus said, finding his voice despite the sting of Henry's words. "But I believe I can inspire others to do the same. People want to make a difference, they just need the right leadership. And I'm willing to work for that. To show them that change is possible." Henry stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The silence in the room grew thick, and Marcus felt his confidence begin to waver. Was he really ready for this? Was he strong enough to push through people like Henry? Finally, Henry spoke again, this time with a slight smirk on his face. "Well, you certainly have the courage to back up your words. I'll give you that. But you'll need more than courage to get my support. You'll need results." The meeting ended with no clear resolution, but Marcus left with a new sense of urgency. He had expected obstacles, but he hadn't anticipated facing them so soon. Henry Caldwell's words haunted him as he left the building, the weight of the challenge settling heavily on his shoulders. As he walked to the car, Jessica caught up with him. "Don't let him get to you," she said, her tone firm but reassuring. "He's just one person. There will always be people like him, people who want to see you fail. But you've already come so far. Don't let them dictate what you can do." Marcus nodded, but inside, he was torn. Henry's challenge had hit him harder than he cared to admit. How could he show people that his vision was more than just words? How could he prove to the skeptics that a child could lead a movement? The answer came to him later that night, as he sat quietly, reflecting on everything he had learned so far. The solution wasn't to focus on proving his worth to people like Henry. It was to continue building the foundation of his vision, one small victory at a time. Every project they launched, every initiative they succeeded in, those were the real proofs of his ability. The world might doubt him, but Marcus knew one thing for sure: he would never stop fighting for the future he believed in. As Marcus's nonprofit continued to grow, so did the pressure. The weight of his newfound responsibility was no longer just an occasional burden, it had become a constant presence in his life. Every day, he woke up to new challenges, new obstacles, and new criticisms. What had once been a dream now felt more like a battle, and Marcus wasn't sure how much longer he could keep going. His team had expanded, and they were making progress. Educational initiatives were being launched in underserved communities, climate change projects were getting off the ground, and small victories were being celebrated. But with every win came new hurdles, doubts, insecurities, and a growing sense of isolation. Marcus was no longer just a kid with a big idea, he was the face of a movement. And with that came expectations he couldn't escape. One morning, as Marcus sat in his office at the nonprofit's headquarters, he found himself staring at the same project plans he'd been reviewing for days. His mind wasn't focused on the task at hand, though. Instead, it was consumed with the questions that had been haunting him for weeks. What if I'm not enough? What if I can't do this? He pushed the thoughts aside, but they lingered, growing louder and harder to ignore. The weight of the decisions he was making, the lives he was trying to change, began to feel overwhelming. He missed the days when his biggest worry had been solving a math problem or reading a book. Now, he was trying to solve the world's biggest issues, and the pressure was suffocating. "Marcus, you've got to come to this meeting," Jessica said, knocking on his office door. "We need your input on the new climate change initiative." Marcus looked up, trying to mask the exhaustion on his face. "Yeah, I'll be there in a second," he said, forcing a smile. Jessica, always perceptive, didn't miss the strain in his voice. She stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. "Are you okay?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Jessica. It's all getting to me. I'm trying to help, but it feels like I'm just not enough. Like nothing I do will ever be enough." Jessica sat down across from him, her expression softening. "Marcus, you've already done more than most people ever will. You've started something that's going to change lives. But change isn't easy. It's not immediate. It takes time, and it takes the people around you. You don't have to carry this weight by yourself." Marcus swallowed hard. "But it's my name, my face, all over this. People expect me to be perfect." Jessica nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "No one expects you to be perfect, Marcus. They expect you to be real. And that's what you've always been, real. That's why people believe in you. You don't have to do this alone. We're all in this together." For the first time in weeks, Marcus allowed himself to feel a little relief. Jessica's words settled over him like a balm, soothing the tension that had been building inside him. But as much as he wanted to believe her, there was still that gnawing doubt, that whisper in the back of his mind that kept telling him he wasn't good enough, that he would fail. "Thanks, Jessica," he said quietly, finally looking up at her. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "You don't have to do it without me," she replied, giving him a reassuring smile. "We're a team. And we're going to make this happen. One step at a time." Marcus nodded, trying to take comfort in her words. But as they moved into the meeting, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something that would push him to his breaking point. The next few days were a blur of meetings, strategy sessions, and press events. Marcus was constantly on the go, juggling his responsibilities at the nonprofit with the pressure of maintaining his public image. But despite all the progress they were making, something was off. The cracks in his resolve were beginning to show, and he was starting to feel the weight of his responsibilities like never before. Then came the day when everything finally broke. It started as a routine press interview. Marcus had agreed to speak with a well-known journalist, Jonathan Wells, about his nonprofit and the latest initiative they were launching in partnership with several other organizations. The interview was supposed to be a simple discussion about the work they were doing, but it quickly took a turn. Jonathan was known for his sharp, probing questions. He had always been critical of young leaders, especially those who had risen to prominence quickly. And Marcus, as he would soon find out, was no exception. "So, Marcus," Jonathan began, leaning forward with a smirk, "you've been hailed as a genius, a visionary, the future of social change. But how do you respond to those who say you're just a figurehead, a puppet being used by people like Jessica Harper and her powerful friends?" The question hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. His stomach twisted, and for a brief moment, he was speechless. The words stung, cutting to the heart of his greatest fear, that he wasn't enough, that people would always see him as nothing more than a symbol, not a real leader. Marcus began, but the words caught in his throat. He glanced at Jessica, who was sitting beside him, her expression tense but supportive. She knew what was happening. This was the moment he had feared. Jonathan didn't let up. "You're only 12 years old, Marcus. What could you possibly understand about the complexities of global problems? You're not an expert, you're just a kid. Do you think you're really qualified to lead a movement this big?" The room fell silent. Marcus could feel the eyes of the world on him, the cameras focused intently on his every move. For a split second, he thought about walking away, about ending the interview and disappearing from the public eye. But then he remembered everything he had fought for, the people who believed in him, the vision he had worked so hard to build. He wasn't going to let anyone take that away. Taking a deep breath, Marcus looked Jonathan squarely in the eye. "I may be young, but that doesn't mean I don't understand. I may not have all the answers, but I know what it's like to see people struggle. I know what it's like to want to make a difference. And I'm doing it, whether you believe in me or not." The words came out with a force Marcus didn't know he had. His voice was steady, calm, but beneath the surface, there was a fire that burned brighter than the doubts and the criticisms. Jonathan was momentarily taken aback, his smirk faltering. But he quickly recovered, shifting in his seat. "Well, we'll see if that's enough to make real change." The interview ended shortly after that, but the damage had been done. The clip went viral within hours, sparking debates across social media, news outlets, and late-night talk shows. Some people praised Marcus for standing his ground, for refusing to let the doubts of others define him. But others, including influential figures in the media and politics, were quick to dismiss him as an overhyped child, too naive to truly understand the complexities of the world. That night, Marcus sat alone in his room, staring at his phone as the notifications poured in. The words were harsh, the criticisms stinging, but something inside him had changed. He wasn't going to let this break him. The world might question him, they might doubt him, but Marcus knew one thing for sure, he wasn't giving up. Tomorrow, he would fight back, not with words, but with action. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one time you stood up for what you believed in, even when the world doubted you? The fallout from Marcus's interview with Jonathan Wells was swift and intense. The media buzzed with reactions, some supportive, others highly critical. A few weeks ago, Marcus had been heralded as a child prodigy who could change the world, but now the narrative had shifted. He was no longer just a young visionary, he was a symbol of everything that could go wrong with celebrity activism, a naive child out of his depth. Jessica Harper had warned him that this day might come. It wasn't just the good press that mattered, it was the criticism that came with it. But Marcus hadn't been prepared for the emotional toll it would take. Every comment, every tweet, every headline that questioned his capabilities, his age, and his worth cut deeper than he anticipated. The worst part? The voices of doubt weren't just from strangers on the internet. It was from those closest to him, his friends, even some of the people within his organization. There were whispers. Could a 12-year-old really lead a movement of this scale? Was he truly capable, or was this all just a publicity stunt? It was late one night when Marcus found himself on the balcony of his apartment, staring out at the city lights. The wind was cool against his skin, a welcome relief from the suffocating heat of the day. He had always found peace here, in these quiet moments of solitude. But tonight, the silence felt heavy. The weight of the world seemed too much to bear. The phone in his hand buzzed, and Marcus glanced down to see a new message from his mother, Olivia. "We need to talk tomorrow. Don't overthink things, okay?" Marcus sighed, feeling the pressure building in his chest. How could he not overthink it? The whole world seemed to be watching, and he wasn't sure if he was ready to face what was coming next. He'd spent his entire life thinking he could fix everything, but now, doubts filled his mind. What if he wasn't the person they all thought he was? His thoughts were interrupted when Jessica called him. She didn't give him a chance to speak before launching into a conversation that Marcus could tell had been rehearsed. "Marcus, I've been following the fallout from the interview," Jessica said, her voice calm but firm. "I know this is a tough moment for you, but you need to understand something. I get it, Marcus muttered, pacing back and forth. I'm just a kid. A kid who's in way over his head. Everyone was right to doubt me. I'm not ready for this. No, Jessica said, her voice firm. You're more than ready. I've seen you tackle problems far more complex than anyone your age should have to. But this is different. This isn't about proving them wrong. This is about proving to yourself that you're capable. Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. He had never told anyone how much he feared letting people down, especially those who believed in him. The fear of failure had always been there, lurking in the background. But now, it felt all-consuming. I'm scared, Jessica, he admitted quietly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. What if I'm not cut out for this? What if I mess everything up? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Jessica's voice softened. It's okay to be scared. But you can't let fear control you. The best leaders are the ones who face their doubts head-on, who push through the hardest times. You've already done that, Marcus. You've come this far because you've never let anything stop you before. Marcus closed his eyes, trying to calm the storm inside his head. He had come so far, and Jessica was right. His fears didn't define him. What defined him was how he moved forward, even in the face of doubt. I know I can't change everything, he said, his voice steadier now. But I can change something. And if I have to do it one small step at a time, then that's what I'll do. Jessica smiled on the other end of the line, her voice full of pride. That's the Marcus I know. And remember, there's no failure, only learning. Every setback is an opportunity to grow. The next morning, after his conversation with Jessica, Marcus sat down at his desk to begin the work that would define his next steps. He knew that he couldn't change the opinions of everyone who doubted him. He couldn't convince the critics who called him a fraud or a puppet. But what he could do was take action. He could prove, with every initiative and every program, that his vision wasn't just a passing phase, it was the future. Marcus decided to begin by focusing on the community outreach initiatives they were rolling out. He reached out to local leaders in various cities, trying to connect with grassroots organizations that had been working on similar issues long before he had entered the spotlight. They were the real experts, and Marcus knew that to build a movement that would last, he needed their support. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't even have all the resources. But he had a voice, a platform, and a relentless drive. And sometimes, that was all you needed. Weeks passed, and slowly but surely, Marcus's efforts began to pay off. The nonprofit continued to grow, launching new projects in underserved communities. His partnerships with local leaders and organizations allowed them to make real, tangible changes in education, housing, and climate action. The critics were still out there, still questioning his every move, but Marcus no longer felt as burdened by their voices. In fact, he was beginning to realize something important. The criticisms, the doubts, the media circus, it was all part of the process. He would never be able to please everyone, but he could make sure that he remained true to his values. And in the end, that was what mattered most. One evening, as Marcus stood at the front of a new community center they had just helped build, he felt a wave of pride wash over him. The kids in the neighborhood had gathered, excited to be part of something that promised to make their lives better. They weren't just the future of their community, they were the present. As Marcus looked out over the crowd, he realized that this was the moment he had been waiting for. It wasn't about proving himself to anyone else. It was about proving that change was possible, no matter how hard it seemed. And for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. The feeling of accomplishment that Marcus had experienced on that evening was fleeting. The success of the community center was, without a doubt, a significant milestone. But as the dust settled, Marcus realized that the battle was far from over. He had faced the storms of doubt, but he knew that new challenges would arise, challenges that would test him even further. However, he wasn't the same person he had been when he started. He had grown. In the days that followed, Marcus threw himself back into his work, focusing on expanding the impact of his nonprofit. There was so much to be done. He wanted to improve educational outcomes for underprivileged children, tackle systemic inequalities, and combat climate change, all at once. The enormity of his goals still weighed on him, but now he saw them through a lens of possibility, not defeat. One afternoon, Marcus sat in his office, scrolling through his emails when one message caught his eye. It was from a prestigious university. The subject line read, "Scholarship Opportunity, Marcus Bennett." His heart skipped a beat as he opened the email. It was an invitation to apply for a scholarship that would allow him to further his studies in the fields of environmental science and social change, two areas that were at the core of his vision for the future. The offer was significant, but it also came with its own set of expectations. Marcus leaned back in his chair, contemplating the opportunity. It felt like the universe was presenting him with a path forward, but was he ready to step onto it? Could he balance his work with the demands of academia? More importantly, was it time for him to take the next step in his journey? The decision weighed heavily on Marcus's mind for several days. He confided in Jessica, who had become not only a colleague but a close friend, and she listened intently, offering her thoughts with characteristic wisdom. "You've done so much already, Marcus," Jessica said one evening over coffee at a small cafe. "But this scholarship could give you the tools, the education, and the resources to take everything you're doing to a whole new level. You don't have to do it alone, and you don't have to have all the answers right now. But you've earned this opportunity. I've been so focused on making a difference, on proving myself, that I'm not sure if I even know what I want anymore," Marcus confessed, staring down at his half-empty coffee cup. "What if I get there, and I realize it's not what I thought it would be? What if it takes me away from the work that matters?" Jessica smiled softly, her eyes filled with understanding. "You're not abandoning the work. You're building on it. Think about how much more you could accomplish with the knowledge you'd gain. And you'll still have your team here, supporting you. It's a win-win." Marcus nodded, still unsure, but feeling a small flicker of hope in the face of his doubts. He had been so focused on running the nonprofit and tackling the world's problems head-on that he hadn't stopped to consider the possibilities for personal growth and development. Wasn't that a part of the journey, too? "I'll apply," Marcus finally said, his voice filled with newfound determination. "I won't let fear hold me back." As the weeks passed, Marcus prepared for the application process. Despite the challenges, there was a sense of excitement in the air, something he hadn't felt in a long time. The application would require essays, interviews, and presentations, and he poured his heart into every part of it. This wasn't just a scholarship, it was the next chapter of his journey. But as he worked, something unexpected happened. The critics, who had been quiet for a while, began to re-emerge. They were vocal again, questioning his motivations, his ability to juggle academic life with his responsibilities at the nonprofit. Some even went as far as to accuse him of being a one-hit wonder, who couldn't sustain the momentum of his success. Marcus found himself once again in the crosshairs of public scrutiny. This time, however, he was ready. His previous experiences with doubt had strengthened his resolve. He realized that the voices of doubt would always be there, they were just another part of the journey. The only way to move forward was to focus on what truly mattered, the work. The day of the interview for the scholarship arrived, and Marcus found himself sitting in a conference room at the university, surrounded by a panel of professors, experts, and administrators. His heart raced, and his palms were clammy, but he forced himself to take deep, steady breaths. He had faced tougher moments when the stakes were higher than a simple academic interview. This was just another step forward. Marcus Bennett, the lead professor began, glancing at his resume. "Impressive track record for someone your age. Tell us, what drives you to pursue social change, especially in the fields of education and environmental science?" The question, simple on the surface, was one Marcus had prepared for. He knew that this was his chance to articulate his vision, to show them the fire that burned inside him. I've always believed that real change starts with individuals, Marcus began, his voice steady. But it takes a collective effort to create lasting impact. I grew up seeing people in my community struggle with the effects of systemic inequality. I've seen how a lack of resources can cripple a generation. But I've also seen how, when people come together, they can lift each other up and change the world around them. That's why I started this nonprofit. Not because I wanted to be a hero, but because I knew I could make a difference. He paused, looking each of the panelists in the eye. Education and the environment are two of the most pressing issues of our time. The future of our planet and the future of our children depend on us taking action today. But that action needs to be informed, it needs to be strategic, and it needs to be sustainable. I want to learn everything I can so I can do even more for the people who need it the most. The panelists exchanged glances, and Marcus could feel the weight of their scrutiny. But he didn't falter. He had made up his mind. This was his moment to prove to himself, and to the world, that he was more than just a figurehead. He was a leader. 2 weeks later, Marcus received the news he had been waiting for. The email notification lit up his phone, and as he opened it, his heart raced. Congratulations, Marcus Bennett. We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as a recipient of the scholarship for the upcoming academic year. He stared at the words, feeling a mixture of disbelief and excitement. This was it. The next chapter was beginning. With his acceptance secured, Marcus knew that the road ahead would be challenging. Balancing his nonprofit with his academic responsibilities would stretch him in ways he had never imagined. But for the first time in a long time, Marcus didn't feel overwhelmed by the weight of it all. He felt ready. His journey was just beginning, and no matter what came next, he was determined to keep moving forward. Marcus sat at his desk, the scholarship acceptance email still open on his laptop screen. The words seemed almost surreal, as if they didn't belong to him, but rather someone else, someone who had already achieved everything he'd ever dreamed of. But it was real, and it was his. In a matter of weeks, Marcus would leave behind the life he had built in his hometown, the nonprofit he had poured his heart into, and the community that had supported him. He had achieved so much already, but this new chapter would take him to a place where everything was uncertain. The university was far away, and it wasn't just the physical distance that worried him. It was the emotional distance. What would happen to his work, his mission, and his identity when he was no longer the kid who could change the world, but a student once again? He had shared the news with his mother, Olivia, and she had reacted with her usual warmth and pride. You're not running away from your responsibilities, Marcus. You're growing into the person you were meant to be, she had said. Still, Marcus knew it wasn't going to be easy. The road ahead was filled with unknowns. The morning of his departure was a whirlwind. Boxes were packed, the final meetings at the nonprofit were held, and Marcus said goodbye to his friends and colleagues, all of whom wished him well, though many of them seemed unsure of what this new step meant for his future. His team had become like family to him, and while they supported his decision, Marcus could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They had worked so hard to build something together, and now, without his presence every day, would they continue to succeed? Would the momentum of the nonprofit fade without his leadership? As his mother helped him load the last of his bags into the car, she pulled him into a hug. I know this isn't easy, Olivia said, her voice thick with emotion. But you're doing the right thing. I believe in you, Marcus. You're not alone. I know, Mom, Marcus replied softly, though a lump had formed in his throat. He hadn't realized how much he was going to miss her, and the life they had built together, until this very moment. I'll be back as often as I can. I won't forget about everything we've worked for. I know you won't, she said with a proud smile. But it's okay to take a step back and focus on your future. You deserve this. With a final wave, Marcus climbed into the car, feeling the weight of the journey ahead. The drive to the university was long, and the closer they got, the more Marcus's excitement began to mix with anxiety. His mother chatted with him about all the things he needed to remember for the transition, and although Marcus tried to engage, his mind kept wandering to the unknown. This wasn't just a new chapter, it was an entirely new book. As they approached the campus, Marcus marveled at the size and beauty of the university. Towering buildings, sprawling lawns, and the hum of students bustling around, it felt both exhilarating and intimidating. This was the place where he would study, learn, and grow. This was where he would figure out how to balance his passions with the realities of higher education. They parked, and as Marcus stepped out of the car, he felt a mix of awe and trepidation. His mother smiled at him as she grabbed his bags. "I'll let you get settled in," she said, trying to mask the sadness in her voice. "I'll call you later, all right?" Marcus nodded, fighting back the emotions welling up inside him. "Thanks, Mom. I'll be okay." She gave him one last hug, and with a deep breath, Marcus watched her drive away. He turned to face the looming buildings of the university. This was it. The beginning of everything. The first few days were a blur. There were orientations, meetings with advisors, and a whirlwind of introductions to new classmates and professors. Marcus was assigned a small dorm room on the university campus, and although it felt foreign and impersonal, he quickly began to unpack and make it his own. He posted a few motivational quotes on the walls, a few photos of his family, and a few more of the community center that had meant so much to him. But even as he tried to immerse himself in the new surroundings, there was a nagging feeling of homesickness that crept in. The campus was vast, the people unfamiliar, and the work ahead daunting. In the quiet moments of the evening, Marcus would find himself scrolling through old photos on his phone, photos of the community projects, of his team, of the kids he had met along the way. Those were the things he missed the most. On the third day, after a full day of lectures, Marcus took a walk across the campus to clear his mind. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow across the sky, and as he walked past the quad, he saw groups of students chatting and laughing together. Some were huddled around tables, working on assignments. Others were sprawled on the grass, simply enjoying each other's company. He could see the bonds forming already, the friendships, the collaborations. But Marcus felt like an outsider. It wasn't that he didn't want to connect with people, it was that he didn't know where to start. How could he relate to people who had never had to work the way he had? How could he explain to them the pressure, the expectation, the sacrifices he had made to get to this point? To them, he was just another freshman, a student trying to find his place. But to him, this wasn't just college, it was the next step in a larger mission. As he walked through the campus, his phone buzzed with a message from Jessica. "How's it going? Have you found your groove yet?" Marcus stopped and leaned against a tree, reading the message. It had only been a few days, but he felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. He quickly typed back, "It's harder than I thought. I miss home. I miss the work." Jessica replied almost instantly, "You're doing the right thing, Marcus. This will only make you stronger. You'll find your balance. Just give it time." Marcus smiled at her words. It wasn't that he didn't believe her, it was just that it felt like the journey had become more complicated than he had expected. And yet, as the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, something inside Marcus clicked. He had never been someone to back down from a challenge. The path ahead was uncertain, yes, but that didn't mean he couldn't carve his own way forward. He wasn't just a student. He was a leader, a visionary. And if he was going to succeed, he needed to embrace this new chapter fully. No more doubts. No more hesitation. Marcus straightened up, took a deep breath, and walked toward the heart of the campus. The next part of the journey had begun. As he made his way to the library to get a head start on his assignments, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this new chapter was going to change everything. It was daunting, yes. But it was also the beginning of something bigger than he could even imagine. And he was ready. Marcus woke up the next morning to the blaring sound of his alarm, groggy from a restless night of sleep. The room was unfamiliar, the walls a dull shade of beige, the faint sounds of other students milling about outside his window. He rubbed his eyes and tried to shake off the feeling of isolation that had settled deep in his chest. It wasn't just homesickness anymore, it was something deeper. A feeling that he wasn't sure how to name, but it was heavy, a pressure building from within, pulling him down. He glanced at the clock and groaned. He had a 9 a.m. lecture on urban environmental policy, a class that he had been looking forward to. He knew that this subject would tie into his work at the nonprofit and further fuel his desire to change the world. But the excitement he once felt was now overshadowed by the weight of doubt. What if he wasn't cut out for this? What if he couldn't keep up with the demanding workload? What if his passion for change, the fire that had driven him all these years, began to burn out in the face of academic pressure? He pushed the thoughts aside, telling himself that it was just the nerves talking. He had made it this far, and this was just a new challenge. He had faced bigger obstacles before. But as he trudged into the lecture hall, surrounded by students who seemed completely at ease, he couldn't shake the feeling of being an imposter. The room was filled with discussions about policies, research papers, and complex environmental models, and Marcus suddenly felt very small in comparison. His mind raced, the self-doubt creeping in with every passing moment. These students had been preparing for this for years, and here he was, barely holding on. The professor entered, and the chatter quieted. Professor Green was a tall, imposing figure with glasses perched on the edge of his nose, a demeanor that exuded authority. He began to lecture on the intricacies of sustainable urban planning, diving into complex data and charts. Marcus tried to focus, but his mind kept wandering. He scribbled down notes half-heartedly, unsure if they would even make sense when he tried to review them later. At the end of the lecture, Marcus gathered his things quickly and rushed out of the room, hoping no one would notice how out of place he felt. He stepped into the bright hallway, the bustling noise of students around him, and for the first time since arriving at the university, he felt completely lost. The following days didn't get any easier. Marcus found himself struggling to keep up with the coursework, the late-night study sessions blurring into one another, his brain constantly overloaded with information. He was used to working hard, but this was different. The stakes were higher, the expectations more intense. Every assignment felt like it was grading his worth, and every exam was another opportunity for failure. And then there was the constant reminder that the nonprofit he had built was no longer within arm's reach. He couldn't just walk down the hall and check in with his team. He couldn't drop by the community center to speak with the children whose futures he was trying to improve. Instead, he was here, alone in this new world of academia, trying to balance the demands of his education with the weight of his purpose. One night, as he sat in the library trying to make sense of a particularly difficult research paper, Marcus received a message from Jessica. "How's it going? I haven't heard from you in a while. You still feeling good about everything?" He stared at the message, hesitant. How could he explain the growing sense of failure, the anxiety that gnawed at him every time he thought about his responsibilities? How could he tell her that he was barely holding it together? Finally, after a long pause, he typed back, "It's harder than I thought. I'm struggling with the work here. I don't know if I'm cut out for this." He hit send and sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of his vulnerability. It felt strange to admit weakness to someone who had always been so strong for him. But the truth was, Marcus was exhausted, mentally, physically, and emotionally. Jessica's response came quickly, "Marcus, you are more than cut out for this. I know this feels overwhelming, but you've been through way worse and come out stronger every time. You're building something incredible, and this is just one part of the journey. Don't lose sight of what you're working toward. You've got this." Marcus couldn't help but feel a small surge of hope at her words. She was right, he had faced so many obstacles before, and he had always found a way through. This was just another challenge, another mountain to climb. It wasn't going to be easy, but he hadn't come this far just to turn back now. The next day, Marcus woke up with a renewed sense of determination. He could do this. He would push through, one step at a time. But first, he needed to find a way to cope with the overwhelming pressure. He reached out to a few classmates he had met during orientation and suggested forming a study group. At first, he wasn't sure how they would respond, but to his surprise, everyone agreed. It was a relief to know he wasn't alone in his struggles. They were all navigating the complexities of the coursework together, and by joining forces, they could share the load. Over the next few weeks, Marcus threw himself into his studies with renewed vigor. The study group became his anchor, a place where he could connect with others who understood the difficulty of balancing academic demands and personal growth. With their support, he started to feel more confident, even tackling the assignments that had once seemed insurmountable. He still missed his non-profit work, but with each passing day, he was learning how to integrate his passions into his studies. He started to see connections between his academic pursuits and the work he had done in the past. Every lecture, every research paper, every discussion, everything was leading him toward the tools and knowledge he would need to make a bigger impact. But the road ahead wasn't without its bumps. As the weeks wore on, Marcus found himself once again at a crossroads. The pressure of being away from home, the constant juggling of responsibilities, and the internal battle between his academic world and his work in the community were wearing on him. He was exhausted, and for the first time in a long while, he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep up the pace. One evening, as he sat in the library, trying to finish an essay, he received a call from Olivia. Her voice was warm, yet he could hear the concern in her tone. "How are you doing, Marcus?" she asked softly. "I'm fine, Mom. Just tired, you know," he replied, trying to sound upbeat. "School's a lot harder than I thought, but I'm managing." "You're allowed to have tough days, sweetheart," Olivia said. "Just don't forget to breathe. You're doing something incredible, but you can't pour from an empty cup. Take care of yourself." Her words hit home, and Marcus realized she was right. He had been so focused on pushing through that he had forgotten to take care of himself. Maybe it was time to slow down a little and remember why he was doing all this in the first place. Not just for the success, but for the people he wanted to help, the change he wanted to make. "Thanks, Mom," he said quietly. "I needed to hear that." As Marcus hung up the phone, he made a decision. He wasn't going to give up. He wasn't going to let the pressure break him. But he also wasn't going to sacrifice his well-being in the process. There was a balance to be found, a way to pursue his dreams without losing sight of who he was. He looked out the library window, watching as the sun set on the horizon. Tomorrow was a new day, and with it came new opportunities to grow. And this time, Marcus was ready to face whatever came next. Marcus stood in front of the large lecture hall, feeling the weight of the entire room's eyes on him. It wasn't a class presentation, no, this was something bigger. He had volunteered to speak at an event organized by the university's Student Leadership Council, a platform for students to share their personal journeys and inspire others. His professor had encouraged him to participate, seeing it as an opportunity to strengthen his communication skills and boost his confidence. But now, standing at the podium, Marcus wasn't sure what to say. The room was filled with hundreds of students, all looking up at him expectantly. He felt as if he had stepped into another world, one where he wasn't the kid from a small town with a big dream. Here, everyone seemed to already have their path figured out, whether they were studying business, engineering, or the arts. They all appeared to be sure of themselves, certain of their futures. Marcus, on the other hand, was still figuring it all out. He took a deep breath and looked out over the crowd, trying to calm the pounding of his heart. The air felt thick, charged with the kind of energy that only came from a room full of driven individuals. He shifted the papers in his hands, but they were shaking. Hi," Marcus started, his voice cracking slightly. The crowd was silent, waiting for him to speak. "My name's Marcus Bennett, and I guess I'm here to tell you my story." The words felt awkward, forced. He had never been one for public speaking, especially in front of such a large group. But he wasn't going to back down. Not now. He cleared his throat and began again. "I'm not going to tell you some dramatic, life-changing tale. I don't have a tragic backstory or some grand narrative about overcoming the odds. What I do have is a dream. A dream to help my community, to create a place where kids can dream big and be anything they want to be, just like I did. He paused, collecting his thoughts. The silence in the room was heavy, but encouraging. But it hasn't been easy. There are days when I wonder if I'm making a difference, or if what I'm doing is even enough. There are nights when I can't sleep because the weight of everything, all the responsibility, is too much. But then I remember why I started this journey in the first place. Marcus felt his heart rate begin to steady. He was speaking from his heart now, and the nerves were starting to fade. He had never been good at pretending to be something he wasn't, and this moment felt real. This was his story, and no one could take that away from him. He continued, his voice growing steadier. When I first got to college, I felt completely out of place. I thought I was supposed to have it all figured out, but honestly, I was lost. I wasn't sure if I could handle the pressure of school, of living up to the expectations I had set for myself. It wasn't just the academics, it was everything, the fear of failing, the uncertainty of my purpose, the thought that maybe I wasn't cut out for this whole higher education thing. But I realized something important. I don't need to have all the answers. I just need to keep moving forward. The room was still, and Marcus could feel the students in the audience leaning in, drawn into his words. He wasn't just talking about his struggles, he was showing them how they were all connected by the same journey. I started a non-profit back home before coming to school. It was just an idea at first, something I thought could make a difference. And it did, at least in the lives of a few kids. But the deeper I got into it, the more I realized that change doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, effort, and patience. And I'm still learning how to balance it all. College isn't just about getting a degree. It's about growing, about finding new ways to do what you're passionate about, and about being okay with the fact that you don't have all the answers yet. He looked out into the crowd, trying to make eye contact with as many people as possible. It's okay not to know. It's okay to be unsure. We're all on different paths, but the most important thing is that we're moving forward. And even on the tough days, when you feel like you can't take another step, remember this: your journey is yours, and no one can define it but you. As Marcus finished speaking, he felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over him. He had done it. He had shared his truth with a room full of strangers, and somehow, it felt like the first step toward finally owning his story. The room erupted in applause, and Marcus could feel the warmth of their appreciation. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel so alone. The connection he had made, even in that brief moment, was enough to remind him why he was there in the first place. After the event, as he walked out of the lecture hall, Marcus felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He had spoken to the students about the fears, the doubts, and the struggles that had held him back for so long. And yet, here he was, still standing, still moving forward. It wasn't about having all the answers. It was about finding the courage to keep going, even when things didn't make sense. His phone buzzed as he walked across campus, and he checked it to see a text from Jessica. "That was amazing, Marcus. You really spoke from the heart. I'm proud of you." He smiled and quickly typed back, "Thanks, Jess. It wasn't easy, but I felt like I needed to say it. It's been a tough few weeks, but I'm starting to find my footing. Slowly, but surely. You're doing great. Keep pushing. And remember, you don't have to do it alone." Marcus paused for a moment, thinking about her words. He didn't have to do it alone. And as he looked up at the vast campus before him, he realized that he wasn't alone at all. He had the support of his friends, his family, and even his classmates, who, like him, were navigating the highs and lows of their own journeys. It was okay to lean on them. It was okay to ask for help when he needed it. Marcus continued walking, a sense of clarity settling over him. He wasn't sure exactly where this path would take him, but for the first time in a long while, he was excited to find out. The weeks after the student event passed in a blur, and while Marcus felt a little more confident, the weight of his dual responsibilities was slowly starting to wear him down. Between his non-profit work back home, his studies at university, and the pressure to maintain relationships with friends and family, he found himself stretched thinner than ever before. It was the weekend again, and Marcus had promised himself that he would spend the entire day working on a new initiative for the non-profit. But as he sat in his small dorm room, his laptop open to a blank page, his mind felt paralyzed. He had too many thoughts running through his head, and none of them were landing. The ideas he had once been so passionate about now seemed distant and out of reach, as if a fog had settled over them. His phone buzzed, breaking his train of thought. It was a message from Olivia. "Hey, I know you're busy, but I need you to hear something. Can we talk?" Marcus felt a slight pang in his chest. Olivia's messages were usually cheerful and encouraging, so the urgency in her words caught him off guard. He quickly replied, "Of course. What's going on?" There was a long pause before she responded. "It's about the non-profit. We've had some issues with the funding. It's not looking good. We might have to cut some programs." Marcus felt his heart drop. He had been anticipating difficulties, but the reality of it hit him like a punch in the gut. The non-profit was his baby, the thing that had kept him going through some of the hardest times in his life. The thought of it crumbling, of letting down the kids he'd worked so hard for, was more than he could bear. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to focus. "How bad is it? What do we need to do? We've got to pull together a new fundraising plan. Fast. But even then, I'm not sure it'll be enough. I just wanted you to know what's going on." Marcus stared at the screen. He could feel the pressure mounting, squeezing his chest. His thoughts spun in every direction. How was he supposed to focus on school when the one thing he had poured his heart into was on the brink of falling apart? He stood up abruptly, pacing around the room. The silence of the dorm made everything feel heavier. It felt like every choice he made, every step he took, was leading to an inevitable disaster. The dream he had built, the work he was doing, what if it all came crashing down? His phone buzzed again, this time a message from Jessica. "Hey, I've been thinking about you. How's everything going?" The words were simple enough, but they hit Marcus hard. He had been so focused on everything falling apart that he had forgotten to check in with the people who cared about him. Jessica had always been his rock, his voice of reason. But lately, he hadn't been able to shake the feeling that he was pushing everyone away. He dropped onto his bed, exhausted. "It's not great, Jess. There's a chance the non-profit might go under, and I can't focus on anything else right now." A moment passed before Jessica's response came through. "I'm sorry to hear that. But Marcus, you've got to remember that you can't do everything alone. You've built something amazing, and even if things don't go as planned, you're not a failure. You've made a difference. Don't let this moment define you." He stared at her words, letting them sink in. He was so used to pushing himself to the limit, to being the one everyone relied on. But somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of the fact that it wasn't all on his shoulders. The pressure of trying to succeed in every aspect of his life, school, the non-profit, relationships, had left him with little to give. And now, the weight of it was unbearable. The next few days passed in a haze. Marcus threw himself into creating new plans and proposals for the non-profit, but his heart wasn't in it. He was physically drained and emotionally spent. The thoughts of failure, of not being good enough, kept creeping into his mind. No matter how hard he tried to focus on school, the looming threat of losing everything was always there in the back of his mind, weighing him down. He had a meeting scheduled with a potential donor, someone who could make or break the non-profit's future. It was supposed to be a chance to turn things around, to secure the funding they desperately needed. But as the day of the meeting approached, Marcus's anxiety continued to build. What if it didn't work out? What if he failed? The meeting took place in a sleek, modern office in the city, a place far removed from the small community he had once worked in. The donor, a well-dressed businessman named Henry Dawson, was everything Marcus wasn't: polished, confident, and seemingly unaffected by the world around him. Marcus sat across from him, trying to hold his composure, but he could feel the sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. His hands were shaking as he handed over the proposal. Henry glanced at the paperwork before looking back at Marcus, his expression neutral. "I've read your proposal. But honestly, I'm not convinced. You've got a lot of potential here, but I need more than passion. I need to see results. Real numbers, real outcomes. If you can show me that, I'll consider funding your project. But no promises." Marcus swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. He had a choice: fold under the pressure or push forward. He could feel every ounce of doubt rising within him, but he refused to give up. Not yet. He took a deep breath and began speaking, his voice steady despite the storm inside. "I understand your concerns, Mr. Dawson. But I can assure you, what we're doing isn't just about numbers. It's about the lives we're changing. We've seen firsthand how our programs have impacted these kids, how their confidence has grown, how they've started to believe in themselves. It's not about the immediate results. It's about creating lasting change. Change that will ripple through generations." Henry didn't immediately respond, and for a moment, the silence was unbearable. But then he nodded slowly, his gaze softening. "I see where you're coming from. But you'll need to back up these claims with concrete data, not just emotion." Marcus nodded, even though inside, his heart was still racing. The meeting was over, and they parted ways with the understanding that Marcus would provide more data. But as he walked out of the building, he realized something. He had stood his ground. He hadn't let the pressure crush him, and he had spoken his truth. For the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe it wasn't all going to fall apart after all. That night, back in his dorm, Marcus sat on his bed, staring at the ceiling. He knew the road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but he was no longer willing to let fear dictate his actions. He couldn't do everything alone, but he had the tools and the support he needed to keep fighting. And as he looked at his phone, seeing the messages from Jessica and Olivia, he knew that even when things got tough, he wasn't alone. The following weeks brought a series of challenges for Marcus. With each passing day, it seemed like the universe was testing his limits, throwing obstacles in his path just as he thought he might have a handle on things. Between managing the nonprofit's financial crisis, keeping up with his academic work, and staying connected with his friends and family, Marcus was beginning to feel like he was living in a constant state of pressure. Yet, despite it all, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was on the verge of changing. He wasn't sure what it was, but he could sense it, a shift in the air. Perhaps it was the upcoming meeting with the potential donor that had left him with a small flicker of hope, or maybe it was the encouraging texts from Jessica and Olivia that kept reminding him not to give up. The email came on a Friday afternoon. Marcus had been buried in his textbooks all morning, trying to finish an essay for one of his most difficult courses when he saw the subject line flash across his screen: "Funding approval, your nonprofit's future." His heart skipped a beat. He quickly clicked open the email, his fingers trembling as he scrolled through the message. "Dear Marcus Bennett, we are pleased to inform you that, after a careful review of your nonprofit's initiatives and the recent proposal you submitted, we have decided to move forward with funding your project. The donation will be issued next week, and we are excited to see the positive impact your work will have on the community. Congratulations, and we look forward to supporting your vision. Sincerely, Henry Dawson." Marcus couldn't believe it. He sat frozen for a moment, staring at the screen. This was the breakthrough he had been praying for. The one thing he thought might be out of reach, funding for his nonprofit, had just been secured. The relief that flooded through him was overwhelming, and for a brief moment, everything felt as though it had fallen perfectly into place. But then, reality set in. The funding was just the beginning. There was still so much work to be done. He couldn't afford to let his guard down, not now. There were programs to run, kids to support, and a whole community that was relying on him. The weight of responsibility pressed down on his shoulders again, but this time, it didn't feel like a crushing burden. It felt like something he could handle. He quickly typed out a message to Olivia, who had been his right hand throughout this journey. Olivia. We did it. Henry Dawson came through. He's funding the nonprofit. I can't believe it. I don't know what to say, we made it. He stared at the screen, waiting for her reply. She responded almost immediately. Marcus, that's incredible. I knew we could do this. You've worked so hard for this, and it's finally paying off. Let's celebrate tonight. You deserve it. Marcus smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. He replied quickly. I'm in. Let's do it. I'll need a break, that's for sure. Later that evening, Marcus met Olivia and Jessica at a small cafe near campus, a favorite hangout where they often went to unwind after a long week. As they sat down together, the energy was lighter than it had been in weeks. Marcus found himself laughing, something he hadn't done in a while. They shared stories about their week, joked about the ridiculousness of their professors, and talked about everything and nothing. For the first time in a long time, Marcus allowed himself to truly relax. This is what it's all about, Jessica said with a smile, raising her cup in a mock toast. We're all here, still standing, still fighting. And look at you, Marcus, you just secured funding for your nonprofit. You're unstoppable. Marcus laughed. I don't know about unstoppable. But it's been a long journey to get here. I still can't believe it's happening. There's so much more to do, though. This is just the beginning. Exactly, Olivia chimed in. It's the start of something big. But you can't forget to enjoy the wins along the way. You've earned this one. Marcus felt a sense of gratitude wash over him. They were right. Despite the late nights, the stress, and the moments of doubt, he had reached a major milestone. And while there was still work ahead, this victory was his. It was a tangible reminder of everything he had fought for, the passion, the sacrifice, the sleepless nights, and how it had all been worth it. The next few days were a whirlwind. Marcus went into overdrive, working with Olivia and the team to prepare for the next steps. There were meetings to be held, budgets to finalize, and new programs to roll out. The pressure never fully eased, but there was a new sense of energy in the air. With the funding secured, it felt as though they could finally start building the vision they had been dreaming of for so long. But with success came the inevitable challenges. There were setbacks, some expected, others not, that tested Marcus's patience and resolve. The donors' funding came through, but there were still unexpected costs, legal hurdles, and logistical issues to address. At times, it felt like they were running in circles, trying to keep up with the demands of making everything work. But something had changed in Marcus. He was no longer paralyzed by fear or overwhelmed by the weight of it all. He knew that nothing was perfect, and that setbacks were simply part of the process. He wasn't trying to make everything happen at once. Instead, he focused on the smaller victories, the daily wins, and the tangible progress that was slowly but surely adding up. And as the nonprofit began to take shape, Marcus also found himself rediscovering his passion for learning. The pressure of grades and exams no longer felt as all-consuming. His academic performance improved, not because he had magically become a perfect student, but because he finally felt aligned with his purpose. The journey of building something greater than himself was teaching him more than any textbook ever could. A month later, Marcus sat in his small dorm room, reflecting on how far he had come. There were still challenges ahead, no doubt. But for the first time, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. As he stared at the calendar on his wall, marking the days until his next meeting with potential donors and community leaders, he couldn't help but smile. The future was still uncertain, but it was his future. And that made all the difference. The momentum from securing funding had propelled Marcus forward, but with it came a newfound weight. Being a leader wasn't just about inspiration, it was about making tough decisions, carrying responsibility, and learning how to navigate the complexities of leading a team. While he was excited to finally see his vision coming to life, Marcus soon realized how much work it would take to ensure that everything he had built didn't just fall apart under the pressure. As the weeks passed, the true scope of his leadership role began to sink in. It wasn't just about overseeing the nonprofit's day-to-day operations, it was about managing relationships with key stakeholders, ensuring that everyone on the team had what they needed to succeed, and handling the financial logistics of running an organization that was quickly growing. Marcus had always been someone who wanted to do it all himself. But as his nonprofit expanded, he quickly realized that he couldn't keep up with everything. There were only so many hours in the day, and as much as he wanted to personally attend to every detail, he had to start trusting others to take on more responsibility. The first person he delegated significant tasks to was Olivia. She had been his partner in this from the beginning, and Marcus knew that her expertise and dedication were key to the nonprofit's success. However, even with her on board, there were still countless things that demanded his attention, from legal paperwork to program development, donor relationships, and community outreach. One afternoon, as he sat in his office with a pile of paperwork stacked high on his desk, Olivia knocked and poked her head through the door. "Marcus, we need to talk," she said, her voice serious. He looked up, feeling a tightness in his chest. "What's going on? I know you've been under a lot of pressure lately, but I think we need to start building a stronger team. You're doing everything yourself, and I can see you're burning out." Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. "I know. It's just hard to let go of control. This is my dream, Olivia. I don't want it to fail." "I get it," she said, stepping into the room and sitting down across from him. "But you can't do everything. We need to bring more people on board. People who are just as passionate as we are about the cause." Marcus leaned back in his chair, feeling a mixture of frustration and exhaustion. He had built this nonprofit from the ground up, and trusting others with its future felt like he was giving up a piece of his heart. But he also knew she was right. If he didn't start delegating, he would never be able to scale the organization and reach the impact he knew was possible. "Okay," he said after a long pause. "Let's start looking for new team members. But we need to make sure they're the right fit. I don't want to bring anyone on board who doesn't share the same vision." Olivia smiled. "I agree. We'll vet everyone carefully. We'll find the right people." The search for new team members was both exciting and overwhelming. Marcus found himself sifting through resumes, interviewing potential candidates, and meeting with individuals who could help take the nonprofit to the next level. Each meeting was a reminder of how far he had come, and how much further he still had to go. A few weeks later, they brought on 2 new team members, Sarah, a talented program manager who had worked with similar organizations in the past, and David, a marketing expert with a passion for youth development. Marcus was impressed by both of them, but he still felt a nagging doubt in the back of his mind. Could he trust them with his dream? Olivia assured him that they were the right fit. "Trust the process, Marcus," she said. "They're here to help, not to replace you. You don't have to carry the weight alone anymore." Despite her encouragement, Marcus couldn't help but feel the anxiety building inside of him. Delegating was hard, he had always been the one to make the decisions, the one to carry the responsibility. But he knew this was the only way forward. He couldn't continue to manage everything himself if he wanted to see the nonprofit thrive. In the weeks that followed, Marcus began to take a step back from the day-to-day operations of the nonprofit. He still met with the team regularly, of course, but he started to trust Sarah and David to run the programs and handle the marketing efforts. It was a difficult adjustment, but as he watched the nonprofit begin to grow in new ways, he started to feel a sense of relief. However, the pressure didn't completely dissipate. Now that the nonprofit was gaining momentum, the stakes were higher. There were still financial hurdles to navigate, and Marcus found himself spending more time in meetings with potential donors, seeking additional funding to support the expanding programs. He had to ensure that the organization didn't fall into the trap of overexpansion without proper resources to back it up. One afternoon, as he sat in yet another meeting with a potential donor, Marcus began to feel a familiar wave of anxiety. He was pitching the nonprofit's mission and programs, trying to convince the donor to contribute, but it felt like he was losing the connection. His words sounded rehearsed, and the passion he once had for the cause seemed to flicker in and out. The pressure was starting to take a toll. The donor, an influential businesswoman named Claire, leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen on the table. "I can see that you're passionate about this," she said. "But what makes your organization stand out from the others? What's your long-term vision?" Marcus took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He had been asked this question countless times, but for some reason, today it felt like an insurmountable challenge. His mind raced, searching for the words that would capture the essence of what he was trying to build. Finally, he closed his eyes for a moment, collecting his thoughts. And then, without hesitation, he spoke from the heart. "I want to create something that lasts," he said. "I want to build a foundation where young people, especially those from underserved communities, have the chance to succeed, not just now, but in the long term. It's not about quick fixes. It's about giving them the tools they need to change their lives and the world around them. And that means investing in education, mentorship, and resources that are sustainable." Marcus looked Claire in the eyes, his voice steady. "This isn't just a nonprofit. It's a movement. And I believe it has the power to change the way we look at education, community, and opportunity." For a moment, there was silence. Claire regarded him thoughtfully, and then she nodded. "I think I understand. Let's talk numbers." The meeting didn't result in an immediate donation, but it was a significant moment for Marcus. He had remembered why he started this journey in the first place. It wasn't about the funding, the pressure, or the accolades, it was about the people he was serving, the lives he was changing. And in that moment, he realized that the true weight of leadership wasn't in managing everything himself, it was in staying true to the vision, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be. Back in his dorm that evening, Marcus reflected on everything that had happened over the past few months. The challenges were far from over, but he had learned something important. Leadership wasn't about carrying everything on his shoulders, it was about inspiring others to share the burden and to believe in the vision as much as he did. The momentum was building, and the nonprofit was growing at a pace Marcus had once only dreamed of. New partnerships were forming, young people were benefiting from the programs, and the word was spreading like wildfire. Yet with success came more challenges, and Marcus was beginning to feel the weight of it all. The more the organization expanded, the more complicated everything became. As he sat in his small office late one evening, papers scattered around him, Marcus felt like he was standing on the edge of something huge, something that could either make or break everything he had worked for. The nonprofit's finances were tight, even with the new funding and growing donations. The pressure to ensure long-term sustainability was starting to feel unbearable. Marcus knew that he couldn't keep up with the demands alone anymore. The team had grown, but even they were stretched thin, trying to keep up with the increasing workload. It was clear, they were approaching a tipping point, and Marcus wasn't sure if they were going to tip over or push through to the other side. It had been a few months since the organization had expanded, and Marcus had to make some tough decisions. The new staff members, Sarah, David, and Olivia, had proven their value, but they needed more help to handle the daily operations. The community was expecting results, and the pressure to deliver was mounting. But with that pressure came more public attention. Local news outlets had started reporting on the nonprofit's success, and Marcus knew that everyone was watching. He couldn't afford to fail now, not when so many people were relying on him. Olivia had become his sounding board in recent weeks. She had been with him since the early days of the nonprofit, and their partnership had only grown stronger over time. She understood his worries, his fears, and his vision. When Marcus needed someone to talk to, she was always there. And tonight, as he stared at the financial spreadsheets in front of him, he knew he needed her advice again. He picked up his phone and dialed Olivia's number. "Hey, Olivia, you have a minute?" Marcus asked when she picked up. "Of course. What's up?" Olivia's voice was calm, but Marcus could hear the concern behind it. She knew he had been working non-stop for weeks. "I'm looking at these numbers," Marcus said, his voice tight with frustration. "I don't know how we're going to make this work. We've got more programs running, but the expenses are piling up. We're barely breaking even. We can't keep growing at this rate without more resources." "I figured we'd be hitting this point soon," Olivia replied. "But listen, we have options. You've already proved that you can raise funds, and we have a strong network now. We can look into more grants, corporate partnerships, or even crowdfunding if we need to. But it's going to take time, Marcus." "I know. But we're running out of time," Marcus said, frustration bubbling over. "If we don't secure more funding soon, we're going to have to cut programs, and I can't let that happen." Olivia was silent for a moment, and then she spoke with surprising calmness. "Okay. Then let's think about this strategically. What do we need most right now? And how can we get the community on our side to help us? We've built relationships, but it's time to really put our faith in them." Marcus sighed. He knew she was right. They had done well in building a reputation, but now it was time to tap into that network more deeply. They needed to create a movement, not just a non-profit. "I'm thinking about taking a more personal approach with the community," Marcus said, his mind racing. "We need to show them that this isn't just about charity. It's about opportunity. If they see how much we care about the kids, how much we're invested in their futures, they might be more willing to support us." Olivia nodded, even though Marcus couldn't see her. "That's a good idea. Maybe we can organize some community events or showcase some success stories. Let people see the difference we're making. If they can feel it in their hearts, they'll want to help." Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe they weren't as close to failure as he thought. Maybe they just needed to refocus, re-engage, and remind people why this work mattered so much. "I'll set up a meeting with Sarah and David tomorrow," Marcus said. "We need to make a plan. We'll do a few events, meet with the local press, maybe even get some of our success stories featured on social media. We need to remind people that we're here for the long haul." "Exactly," Olivia said. "And let's not forget to give ourselves some credit. We've come a long way." The next few weeks were a blur. Marcus and the team threw themselves into organizing community events, reaching out to local businesses for sponsorships, and working with influencers to raise awareness. They held a series of open houses, inviting families, community leaders, and potential donors to come and see the impact the nonprofit was having firsthand. They created a social media campaign showcasing the stories of the young people they were helping, sharing personal testimonials and success stories that resonated with their followers. And to Marcus's surprise, the community rallied behind them in a way he hadn't expected. Donations started to come in from local businesses, individuals who were touched by the stories, and even alumni who had benefited from the nonprofit's programs. The momentum was building. The tipping point had arrived, but instead of falling, they had pushed through. A few weeks later, Marcus sat down in a meeting room with Olivia, Sarah, and David. It had been a busy few months, but finally, the nonprofit was on more stable ground. They had secured new funding, expanded their programs, and were beginning to reach even more young people. "We did it," Marcus said, a sense of accomplishment settling over him. "We turned it around." Olivia smiled. "We all did. But it wouldn't have happened without your vision, Marcus." "I couldn't have done it without you guys," Marcus said. "I'm grateful for every one of you. We're building something special here." As the team celebrated their recent successes, Marcus allowed himself a moment to reflect on how far he had come. It hadn't been easy, and there were still challenges ahead, but he had made it through the hardest part. And in the end, the tipping point had been a turning point, not just for the nonprofit, but for him personally. He had learned what true leadership was, trusting others, staying focused on the mission, and finding hope in the face of adversity. It wasn't about avoiding the hard times. It was about pushing through them, knowing that the work they were doing was worth every ounce of effort. The final chapter of Marcus's journey felt like a culmination of everything he had worked toward. The nonprofit had grown beyond what he had initially imagined, and the sense of accomplishment was overwhelming. But as he looked at the future, he realized that the work was far from over. In many ways, it was only just beginning. The past months had been a whirlwind of successes, setbacks, and revelations. Marcus had learned how to balance the weight of leadership with the need for self-care, how to trust others with his vision, and how to push forward when the odds seemed insurmountable. But the question now was, what came next? For the first time in a long while, Marcus allowed himself to truly reflect. He had always been someone who rushed from one goal to the next, never quite taking the time to savor his achievements. But after everything he'd been through, he knew it was important to pause, breathe, and truly appreciate the moment. Marcus sat on the edge of his bed one evening, his phone in hand, scrolling through messages of gratitude from people he had impacted. There were texts from parents thanking him for giving their children a chance at a better future, emails from donors expressing their support, and social media posts from kids whose lives had been forever changed by the programs he had built. It was overwhelming in the best way possible. But beyond the messages, beyond the thank yous and donations, there was something that mattered more, the difference they were making in the world. Marcus knew that his work was about more than just numbers and fundraising. It was about creating a legacy of hope, education, and opportunity. One evening, as the nonprofit's success continued to grow, Marcus found himself in a quiet moment of reflection. Olivia had just wrapped up a meeting with their new partners, and Sarah and David were busy working on an upcoming event. The office was calm, and Marcus was left alone with his thoughts. He thought back to that fateful night when he had first spoken to the TV host. The way his words had caused such a stir, the way the world had reacted, it felt like a lifetime ago. But that moment had been a catalyst, an awakening. It had forced him to confront his own insecurities, to understand that his voice mattered, and that his ideas could change the world. He had come a long way since that interview. The fire inside him had only grown stronger. There was still work to be done. The nonprofit had expanded to multiple cities, and the demand for their programs was growing. But now, Marcus had a new perspective. He wasn't just building a nonprofit. He was building a movement. He stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. The streets were bustling with life, full of people chasing their own dreams, just like he had been doing for so long. But now, he wasn't just dreaming for himself. He was dreaming for all of the kids whose lives he was helping to shape. A few months later, the nonprofit held its biggest fundraising event yet. The venue was packed with supporters, donors, and community leaders, all gathered to celebrate the progress they had made and to look ahead at the future. The room was filled with energy, and there was a palpable sense of optimism in the air. People were excited about what the nonprofit had accomplished and what they would do next. Marcus stood at the front of the room, a microphone in hand, looking out at the sea of faces. He had come a long way from the nervous young man who had once doubted his ability to lead. Now, he stood there with confidence, knowing that he had earned every step of his success. He took a deep breath before speaking, the room falling silent in anticipation. When I first started this journey, he began, I didn't know if it would work. I didn't know if I was even the right person to lead this movement. But what I did know was that I had a vision of a world where every child, no matter their background, had access to the opportunities they deserve. I knew that the only way to make that happen was by creating a community, by bringing people together who believed in this cause. He paused, looking around the room. I never could have done this alone. This journey has been shaped by each of you, our donors, our volunteers, our mentors, and of course, the incredible young people we serve. You have all believed in this dream, and together, we are making it a reality. A wave of applause rippled through the room, and Marcus felt a rush of emotion. He knew that they had accomplished something extraordinary, but the real impact would be seen in the years to come. The work we're doing isn't just about the programs we run, Marcus continued, his voice steady. It's about creating a ripple effect. It's about empowering young people to take ownership of their futures, to build something for themselves and for their communities. It's about breaking the cycle of poverty and providing the resources needed to create lasting change. As he finished his speech, the room erupted into cheers, and Marcus felt a surge of pride. They had come so far, and yet, he knew that this was just the beginning. In the weeks that followed, the nonprofit reached new milestones. They secured even more partnerships, expanded their reach to new cities, and brought in additional funding. But Marcus wasn't just focused on growth. He was focused on impact. He worked closely with his team to ensure that their programs were evolving and adapting to meet the needs of the communities they served. They began offering mentorship opportunities for students, organizing job placement programs, and working with local businesses to create internships and apprenticeships. The goal was clear, not just to provide education, but to equip young people with the skills and resources they needed to thrive in the real world. And the results spoke for themselves. More and more students were graduating from the programs, and many of them were going on to pursue careers, start their own businesses, or give back to their communities. It was proof that their work was making a difference. As the nonprofit continued to grow, Marcus realized that he had built something far beyond a nonprofit. He had built a movement that was changing the lives of young people and transforming communities. And it was only getting started. Sitting in his office one late evening, Marcus looked at the latest updates on the nonprofit's progress. He smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The road had been long and difficult, but it had also been one of the most rewarding experiences of his life. He had learned so much about leadership, about resilience, and about the power of community. But most importantly, he had learned that anything was possible if you had the courage to dream, and the determination to see it through. And as he looked out the window at the city below, Marcus knew that this was just the beginning of an even greater journey. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one lesson you've learned from this story that has changed the way you approach your own dreams?